You live on my land. That makes you mine. Kiara Finlay heard those words in the back of Pierce Gallagher's car, Dublin's cold-eyed mafia boss sitting beside her like he already owned the rest of her life. She was 23, the gardener's daughter. For 3 years, she'd lived in the stone cottage on the Gallagher estate, certain no one in that house had ever truly seen her. But that night, the night she saw something in a nightclub she was never meant to see, when Pierce Gallagher took her by the arm and put her in his car, he already knew far too much about her. Kiara didn't know that yet, and she didn't know something else either, that even her own name didn't belong to her. Kiara Finlay had seen Pierce Gallagher exactly twice in 3 years, both times through tinted glass, both times from a distance. That Saturday morning, kneeling in the mud along the upper walking path with a hand hoe, she had no reason to think the third time would be any different. She was wrong. The stone cottage where she lived with her father sat on the far edge of the Gallagher estate, close enough that she could see the lights of the main house through the trees, far enough that nobody inside had ever learned her name. Or so she believed. Cold May wind was moving across the grounds. Her father was working lower down near the flower beds. The main house loomed grey and enormous behind her, the kind of building designed to remind everyone exactly where they stood. She didn't hear the front doors open. A polished shoe stopped 3 inches from her hand. She looked up. A coat that fit too well to belong to anyone decent, expensive trousers with a clean break at the hem, and along the edge of one immaculate shoe, a thin smear of mud where her hoe had caught the border. The toe nudged it once, making sure she'd seen it. Pierce Gallagher's voice came out sharp, pitched just loud enough to cut. "Watch it!" Heat rushed into her face before she could stop it. She heard her own voice come out smaller than she intended, the apology reflex firing before her brain caught up. "Oh, I'm sorry, sir." The broad-shouldered man a half-step behind Pierce, his right arm, his bodyguard, the one who was never more than 2 steps from his employer, already had a folded white handkerchief extended. Pierce took it without looking, wiped the edge of his shoe once, and looked at her. Ice blue, cold in a way that had nothing to do with the morning air, with something behind them steadier than anger and worse than contempt. Her chest went tight. She looked down first. He handed the handkerchief back and walked on, and that was the end of it as far as he was concerned. The relief barely reached her shoulders before Pierce's younger brother came down the steps. Colin Gallagher was running both hands back through his dark blonde hair, squinting at the grey sky with the suffering of someone who hadn't been consulted about the weather. His attention dropped to the path, then to his trouser cuff where mud had caught the edge. "For God's sake," he stopped in front of her. "Garden girl, you've made a mess of the whole path." Kiara kept her grip on the hoe. "I already apologized." He crouched and pressed his fingers against the smear on his cuff. It spread instead of lifting. Disgust moved across his face. He bit down on his lower lip, eyes dropping, not to her face, lower, and wiped his dirty hand down the front of her overalls. Kiara's skin crawled under the fabric. She pushed the dark hair back from her face and her head snapped up. Cheeks flushed, the freckles across them sharper for it, eyes a pale, startling blue. She said nothing. Her jaw was tight enough to ache. From the end of the drive, where Pierce was already standing at the open car door, his voice cut across the gravel. "Colin!" Colin didn't so much as glance at her. He was already walking toward his brother, one hand lifting loosely. "What?" "My hand was dirty." Pierce waited, still saying nothing, until his brother crossed the gravel and got in. Aidan, the bodyguard, followed. The black SUV moved between the yew hedges and disappeared through the gate. Kiara stared after it, jaw tight, fingers cold around the hoe handle. "Spoiled bastards," she muttered to the empty drive, to nobody. She yanked off her gloves and walked to the cottage. Her father was at the kitchen table with a mug in both hands, work jacket over the chair behind him. He took one look at her face and reached for the teapot. Kiara dropped into the chair across from him. "I hate it here, Dad. That house and those men, I genuinely hate it." Peter poured into the second mug and set it in front of her. He turned his own mug slowly between his palms before he answered. "When we were in trouble, they gave me steady work. This cottage, no rent on top of the wage. Men with that kind of power don't think kindness is part of the arrangement." People in town say this family is dangerous. She wrapped both hands around the mug. The warmth helped a little. Not just talk. They lower their voices when they say Gallagher. Some of them say Mafia. Are we actually safe here, Dad? Peter set his mug down. Technically, this town belongs to the Gallaghers. Half of Dublin, too, if you're keeping count. Crispin Gallagher has dealt fairly with me for 3 years and left us alone. Keep your head down, stay out of their way, and this place is safe enough. Your school's nearly finished. Once you have a position, you won't need to stay. Her throat pulled tight before she could stop it. I don't want to leave you here alone. When I have a proper income, I'm bringing you to Dublin with me. Something shifted in his face, worn and warm at once. He reached across and closed one rough, calloused hand around her wrist. Kiara, love, I was born for this ground. Flowers, soil, grass. This is my work. I'm happy here. She managed half a smile. Then I'll make Dublin coddle tonight. The lines around his eyes deepened. Don't go mean on the onions. Every single time, Dad. That evening, Kiara cycled to her best friend Sadie's, expecting tea and an hour of easy conversation. Sadie opened the door already dressed to go out. We're going to the Wick tonight. Dublin Docklands. What? No, Sadie. Kiara stared at her. We said we were staying in, having a proper night in. I don't have anything to wear and I don't have money. I have, for both of us. Sadie was already pulling her inside by the sleeve. I have a wardrobe and Finn has the car. Kiara glanced at the clock on the wall. 10 o'clock at night. Sadie cut her off before she could get the words out. 30 minutes and we're there. She grabbed Kiara by the arm and steered her straight toward the wardrobe. Oh, come on, Kiara, don't look at me like that. We're going out. You're 23, not buried alive. Let's get you dressed. 15 minutes later, Kiara stood in front of the mirror, one hand pulling at the neckline, her brow pulled together. This is too much. Sadie appeared over her shoulder and slapped her hand down. God gave you a great chest. Hiding it isn't modesty. It's just waste. Leave it alone. The Wick was exactly the kind of place Kiara had successfully avoided her entire adult life. Amber light, music in expensive layers, perfume and alcohol fighting each other in the warm air, dancers near the back wall, 2 people kissing against a pillar near the bar, clothes everywhere that cost more than they looked. Sadie steered her to a bistro table near the wall. Best spot in Dublin right now, this place. What are you having? Kiara shrugged. Guinness? Sadie turned toward Finn with the expression of someone who had been personally wronged. Tequila, both of us, before she ruins my night. Finn, who had been quietly devoted to Sadie for at least 2 years and was still somehow smiling about the arrangement, came back with the shots. The first burned. The second loosened the knot in Kiara's shoulders. By the third, the room had stopped feeling hostile and started feeling merely loud. Then she felt it before she saw it. The same shift she recognized from mornings on the estate, the way a room changes when certain people walk into it. Staff near the entrance straightened. Conversations dropped half a register. 2 men in dark suits came through the door with 2 bodyguards behind them, and the crowd thinned ahead of them the way it did for people who didn't have to ask. Sadie leaned toward her. Who are they? Kiara reached for the glass Finn had just set down. The Gallaghers. A small lift at the corner of her mouth, not quite a smile. The family from the estate. Sadie's eyebrows went up. Your estate? Their estate. I live in the cottage on the grounds. She watched them move through the room, the crowd shifting on instinct, nobody quite meeting their eyes. They treat the world like the rest of us are just here to clear the path. Both of them. Haven't decided which one is worse. Still working on it. Sadie bumped her shoulder, already grinning. Go say hello. Kiara gave her a look. They don't even know my name. My father's worked their land for 3 years, and I'd be surprised if they know his. She watched Pierce and Colin disappear past a velvet partition at the back of the club. Don't stare. 4 shots was one too many. The room had started tilting at the edges. Kiara told Sadie she needed the bathroom and followed a corridor away from the noise. The music was fading behind her. The lights changed. Dimmer, then dimmer still, the amber bleeding into something colder and less friendly. The hall narrowed. There was no one around. She was about to turn around. The corridor was too quiet when a voice reached her through a door on the left, barely open, letting just enough sound out. A man's voice, low, fractured, wrecked with fear. Please, please, I won't go near her again. I swear to God. She stopped. Every sensible instinct said to turn around. Go back to the music and Sadie and Finn. She moved closer instead. Through the gap in the door, dark suits, polished shoes, a man on his knees with his arms raised, shaking from the shoulders down. Then Pierce Gallagher moved into the slice of light, profile sharp, completely still, completely composed, and raised the gun in his hand. The shot tore through the room. The kneeling man screamed and collapsed sideways, clutching at his knee, and Chiara's hand flew over her mouth, but a sound came out anyway. Her feet had stopped working. Her ears were ringing. She stood there with her hand pressed against her mouth and her pulse hammering in her throat, and she couldn't move. The door flew open. Aiden filled the frame. His voice came out completely level. "Boss, we have a witness." His grip closed around her arm and pulled her into the room before she'd decided to move. Whiskey hit her first, then blood, then something expensive underneath it all. Colin stood near the far wall with the flat expression of a man whose evening had become inconvenient. The man on the floor was making a sound Chiara was doing everything she could to block out. She tried not to look at him. Her eyes went there anyway, then dragged themselves up and caught on Pierce's right hand. The knuckles split and already darkening at the edge. She looked away from those pale blue eyes she had absolutely no business meeting right now. Pierce turned slowly toward her. He was wiping the barrel of the gun with the white handkerchief, unhurried, and when he looked up, the corner of his mouth shifted, not quite a smile, something sitting just beneath one. His gaze moved over her from top to bottom, taking its time before it settled on her face. She felt it like a temperature change, slow and deliberate, and had nowhere to put it. She was suddenly very aware of the dress, the neckline, the fact that she was in a room she had no business in, being studied by a man who had just shot someone and looked completely fine about it. She didn't move. She wasn't sure she could. "Garden girl." He didn't look surprised. "What are you doing in a place like this?" He knew who she was. Not her name, her place. The cottage, the grounds, the girl with the hoe. It landed wrong, like being noticed and dismissed at once. Chiara swallowed. "Looking for the bathroom." Pierce turned to the men behind him. "Get him to a hospital. Every time he limps, let him remember what it costs to touch a woman who didn't ask for it." He glanced at Aiden. "Let her go." Aiden's hand dropped from her arm. Chiara turned immediately for the door. Pierce Gallagher's voice cut across the room. "Stop." She went still with her hand on the handle and turned around slowly. He had set the gun on the table beside the folded handkerchief. His hands were still. His eyes didn't leave her face. "You're coming home with me." No opening for argument in it. "This isn't a place for you." Her chest went tight, not quite anger. Chiara stared at him. "What?" He turned to Aiden without taking his eyes off her. "Colin stays. He can finish here. We're leaving. Get her to the car." "My name," she said. The words were out before she could stop herself, and she regretted them the instant they landed. "Is Chiara." His expression shifted, something there and gone. "I know." She stood very still. She had no idea what to do with that. He walked past her and out into the corridor. Aiden stepped aside and held the door open, one hand gesturing toward the hall. "After you." Chiara didn't move. Somewhere beyond these walls the music was still going, Sadie was still dancing, the whole ordinary Saturday night carrying on without her. Her chin came up. "My friends are here. I came with them." Pierce didn't come back into the room. His voice reached her from the corridor, already moving away. "Not anymore." The words followed her out. She wasn't sure they'd ever stop. Pierce kept moving and Chiara followed, because the alternative was standing still in the middle of the Wick, while everyone watched her get claimed like a problem that belonged to somebody else. Halfway to the exit, she twisted back. 2 bodyguards, close enough behind her to make the whole thing feel less like a conversation and more like being removed. That was when she saw Sadie. Sadie had turned away from the dance floor and was staring straight at her, eyebrows up, confusion already shifting into alarm. Her voice cut through the music. "Chiara, what's going on?" Chiara broke away and closed the distance between them fast. "I have to go." The words came out breathless, tripping over each other. "I'll explain everything later, I promise." Sadie's hand caught her wrist. With the Gallaghers? Her voice dropped. The ones who didn't know your name an hour ago? Kiara, that's not safe. She's going home. Pierce's voice landed from directly behind her, close enough that she felt it before she heard it. Sadie went still. This isn't a safe club. His gaze moved over Sadie. Not a glance, something slower and more deliberate, taking in the dress, the shoes. Especially not dressed like that. He shifted to Finn without waiting. Take her home. Finn opened his mouth. Pierce was already moving. His hand closed around Kiara's upper arm, 4 fingers, firm, no negotiation in it, and steered her toward the exit. The humiliation landed before the anger did. Finn was staring. The barman nearest to them had started pretending very hard not to look. Kiara jerked against Pierce's grip, furious at the pressure of his fingers, more furious at how obvious all of it must have looked. What do you think you're doing? The breathlessness was gone. I'm not a child. I'm 23. Pierce Gallagher kept walking. The door opened and cold air hit her face. His grip shifted as they reached the car, a black Bentley sitting at the curb, its body polished to a mirror under the Dublin lights. And she was beside him now rather than being steered, which somehow felt worse, as though she'd agreed to the direction of things. Pierce opened the car door himself. He stood beside it, one hand on the frame, and looked at her. Get in. Kiara pushed the hair back from her face, held his gaze for one long second, and got in. The cream leather was cold through the thin fabric of the dress, raising goosebumps along the backs of her thighs. Pierce got in from the other side. The door closed with the kind of quiet that costs money. The car pulled away. Neither of them said anything. The arm where he'd held her had started to burn, a slow heat working into the muscle. She pressed her knees together and looked straight ahead and turned one thought over carefully. He had seen her once, maybe twice, never long enough to register her face. So how had he known her? Here, in Sadie's dress, across a room full of people. You look different. His eyes were on the window. Than usual. She kept her hands in her lap. It's Sadie's dress. The corner of his mouth moved. Kiara's throat tightened around what she hadn't meant to ask yet. Why did you shoot that man? Pierce was quiet long enough that she thought he'd decided not to answer. Some people need to be punished for what they've done. His tone was the same as if he'd said it about the weather. It's a straightforward principle. Kiara swallowed. What did he do? Pierce turned slowly from the window. For the first time that night, his eyes came directly to hers, and stayed there. Something in her chest pulled tight, and she didn't look away, even though she should have, even though every sensible part of her was telling her to. He raped a woman, and beat her badly enough that she spent 3 weeks in hospital. No softening on the words, no buffer. He owns that club. That's what kind of place you were in tonight. The sentence sat between them in the dark of the car. His eyes dropped briefly to the neckline of the dress. Her fingers moved before her brain caught up, reaching for the fabric, pulling it upward, both hands not quite steady. The inside of her cheek pressed hard against her teeth. The neckline didn't move much. Pierce turned back to the window. The silence that followed was worse than if he had kept looking. She found herself looking at his hands anyway, the right one resting on his knee, knuckles split and dark, the joint of the ring finger sitting slightly wrong. She thought about what must have happened before the gun came out. That could be cracked, she said, almost to herself. His head turned. What? She cleared her throat. Her tongue sat thick against the roof of her mouth. Your fingers. That joint. The bruising isn't sitting right. If it's a small fracture and you leave it, the hand stiffens. Full range of movement might not come back. Pierce looked at his own hand the way a person looks at something they've mostly stopped thinking about. My hands are used to it. He went back to the window. Kiara studied his profile without entirely meaning to. Sideways, careful, the way you look at something you don't want to be caught looking at. The sharp line of his jaw, the high cut of his cheekbone, dark hair pushed back from his face with the kind of effortlessness that probably cost more than it looked. He was bigger than the distance between them should have allowed. Wide through the shoulders, the seat beside him somehow narrower for it. Her gaze dropped to his hands on his knee. Long-fingered, well-kept, made for something precise. which sat badly with everything she now knew those hands had done tonight. Then his scent reached her. She had grown up learning plants by smell before she could name them, and the habit had never quite left. She worked through it without deciding to. Sandalwood first, then cardamom, something heavier underneath. Tonka, maybe. A thread of rose so faint it was almost imagined, and amber holding all of it together, warm and low. Nothing like his eyes. The contrast unsettled her more than it should have. "You're staring." Chiara looked forward immediately. "I wasn't. You were in the garden this morning, still facing the window. Yesterday on the south path. Most mornings when you leave for college, actually." The faintest edge of something in his voice. "You have a particular way of not looking at things." Her skin went cold in a way that had nothing to do with the leather seat. He had been clocking her. All this time she had believed herself invisible to him, background, part of the estate's fixed infrastructure, and somewhere beneath that, a story she had been telling herself about her own invisibility had just been quietly taken apart. He shifted slightly. "What are you studying?" "Physio?" Her voice came out smaller than she intended. She heard it. The smallness of it irritated her more than anything else had tonight. She started again, flatter this time. "Physiotherapy, final year." He nodded once, eyes still on the window. "Good field, smart girl." The second part landed differently than the first, the kind of thing you say to someone you've already measured and filed. She kept her eyes on the road and said nothing, and she was very aware, suddenly, of exactly how she must look to him. The borrowed dress, the wrong shoes, the gardener's daughter trying to hold her posture in the back of a car that cost more than her father's annual wage. Headlights swept across wet grass, caught the stone face of the cottage. Her father's kitchen light still on, warm and small in the dark. Then they were past it, moving up toward the main entrance of the manor. Of course she wouldn't be dropped at her own door. Chiara was out before Aidan reached the handle, straightening the dress, grateful for the cold on her face. "I appreciate you making sure I was safe tonight." She kept her voice measured. "But I'm an adult, and regardless of your intentions, putting someone in a car without their agreement isn't—" "Garden girl." Pierce's voice cut across hers, flat and unhurried. She stopped. "Come upstairs." Pierce was already at the front door, back to her, one hand against the frame. "You said it yourself." His voice carried easily across the dark steps. "The joint could stiffen." "I can't wait until morning." He stepped inside without looking back. "I'm not asking." Chiara stood on the cold stone in borrowed shoes. Across the dark lawn, 300 meters away, her father's light was still on. She followed him inside. Chiara had never been inside the main house. Not once in 3 years, not for any reason. 2 in the morning and the silence was complete. The sort only old buildings carried, made of settling timber and rooms that had been important for a very long time. Oil paintings along the walls, dark wood, furniture chosen to impress guests who would never actually sit in it. Valuable and cold and oppressive in a way that had nothing to do with the hour. Pierce moved through it as though none of it existed. At the bottom of the wide staircase, he glanced back. "Follow me." The stairs were broad enough to swallow sound. Dark-stained wood beneath a runner that muffled her steps but not her pulse, which she could feel moving too fast at the base of her throat. She had no good answer for what she was doing here. She kept walking anyway. At the top, the landing opened into a wide hall that split into 2 corridors. Pierce paused. His gaze went left, into the dark, into whatever silence lived down there, and stayed a moment before he turned right without explanation. He checked once over his shoulder. She was. They walked 30 steps, maybe more, past 3 or 4 closed doors, before they reached the last one at the end of the corridor. The house felt like it kept adding itself in the dark ahead of them, and then simply didn't stop. Pierce's room wasn't a bedroom. It was more like a private apartment folded inside the house. A wide desk against one wall, a large leather armchair facing a fireplace burned down to low embers, bookshelves that showed actual use, and somewhere past the sitting area, a bed that made the whole space feel less like a room and more like a life that had claimed its own territory. The room smelled like smoke, and the thing she'd memorized in the car, sandalwood, amber, the rest of it. Closer now, warmer. Chiara stood in the doorway and looked at all of it. Pierce shrugged off his jacket and draped it over the back of the armchair with the same deliberate economy he applied to everything. He sat and rolled one shirt sleeve up to the elbow, once, twice, unhurried, then looked at her. "Are you going to examine me or just stand there?" She crossed the room. It took more composure than it should have. She took the hand he held out. The knuckles were dark and swollen, the ring finger joint still shifted wrong. She pressed carefully along the metacarpal. Her voice came out quieter than she meant it to. "Does this hurt?" His eyes stayed on her face. "No." She moved her grip a centimeter higher and pressed again. "Here?" He didn't look away. No. He was still watching her. Steady, patient. The same quality of attention he'd carried all night. She could feel it on the back of her neck. She let go of his hand. "I need to clean it first." She turned for the bathroom door. Dark marble on every surface, walls, floor, ceiling, the color of deep water. She stood in the middle of it and thought about who would choose a bathroom in this color. Thinking the question helped. She raised her voice through the open door. "Is there a first aid kit in here?" The answer came back from the other room, clear and unhurried. "Cabinet above the sink." She found it behind his shaving set, past several cologne bottles she recognized before her nose even confirmed them. She caught her own reflection in the cabinet mirror for half a second. Sadie's dress, 2 in the morning, Pierce Gallagher's bathroom. She took the kit and went back. She worked efficiently. Cotton, antiseptic, the practiced motions of 2 years of clinical training. His hand was warm, not incidentally. Specifically warm, and she noticed it because her own hands were cold. She wondered if he'd noticed. Then she was angry at herself for wondering because her pulse was too fast and her hands gave too much away, and she was almost certain he could feel both. His voice came from just above where she was bent over his hand. "You're not going to stand all night." He nodded toward the empty half of the armchair. "Sit down." She sat, at the very edge of it, spine straight, both feet flat on the floor, as little of herself in his space as she could manage. She ran her thumb along each finger carefully. "This is a fracture. Something's shifted in the joint." He hadn't moved his gaze. "How long before it's right?" The question came with the ease of someone who had never once been told to wait. She felt it in her jaw. She lifted her chin. "I'm not a magician. I can wrap it, but you need to leave it alone for a week." His eyes didn't change. "A week? Minimum?" She held his gaze because she'd said what she'd said and she meant it. No gripping, no lifting, nothing that stresses the joint. She let a breath settle between them. "Especially not hitting anyone." His brow dropped. Something shifted at the corner of his mouth. Not quite amusement, but close enough that she felt the heat rise up through her chest before she could stop it. "Are you actually a physiotherapist?" Chiara stood. "I'm a student, final year. But this is exactly what a fracture like this requires, and if you want a second opinion, you're welcome to call someone at 2 in the morning and ask them." She pulled the bandage from the kit. "Sit still." He looked at his own hand, then back at her. "Fine." She wrapped it slowly. Gauze over gauze, each layer careful, her fingers working closer to his than she would have liked. Close enough that the heat of his skin registered against hers. She was leaning forward when her hair slipped off her shoulder and fell across his face. She didn't move immediately. Neither did he. "Sorry." She straightened just enough to push it back, and when she looked up to check his face, Pierce was already looking at hers, close, unhurried, the way he did everything. 2 seconds, maybe less, long enough. She looked back down at the bandage. She was leaning forward, and Sadie's dress was doing what it had been doing all night, and Pierce's gaze was exactly where she thought it was. She felt it without looking up. And she kept her eyes on the bandage, on the joint, on the entirely clinical task she was performing at 2 in the morning, in a room that felt less like a stranger's space the longer she stayed in it. She straightened and stepped back. "Done. 1 week. Don't test it." Pierce looked at the wrapped hand for a moment, then his fingers closed around her wrist. Just once, just briefly, loose enough to release but deliberate enough that it wasn't accidental. She felt the warmth of it move up her arm before she understood what she was doing with it. She looked at his hand on her wrist, then she looked at him. She pulled her wrist free, slowly, and pushed her hair back from her face, tucking it behind her ear. Her voice came out even. "Good night, Mr. Gallagher." Pierce said nothing. He sat with the wrapped hand resting on his knee and watched her go, and the silence he gave her was more unsettling than anything he might have said. The night air was cold and immediate and a relief. She walked fast, her borrowed shoes quiet on the stone path, the manor behind her and the dark lawn ahead. Her mind had already started going back through it before she told it to stop. Fast, involuntary, the kind that doesn't ask permission. His hand closing around her arm in the dark of the club. His voice in the car, even and unhurried, like the world had nowhere else to be. His profile against the glass, all jaw and shadow. His scent, warm in a way his eyes had never been. The heat of his hand under her fingers, the way he'd watched her the entire time and never once looked away. Chiara stopped. The cottage was 30 meters ahead, her father's light still on in the window. She took a breath. Pierce Gallagher. Her heart was already doing it, just from the thought of him. The next morning came in grey and still. Pierce had been awake before it arrived. He was dressed and moving through the upper hall when he heard his brother's voice carrying through a half-open door, loud enough to mean Colin wasn't trying to keep it down. He slowed without deciding to, one hand in his coat pocket, the other, still wrapped, at his side. He stopped just outside it. Colin's voice, louder now. "No, absolutely not." Pierce stayed where he was. Colin again, the words coming faster. "I'm not marrying her. Not for you, not for business, not for anyone. I'm with Katie, and I'm not thinking about marriage for another 5 years. Crispin's voice came out without heat, which was always worse than if he'd shouted. "I'm not asking what you want." Colin's voice dropped, the disbelief cutting through the anger. "Then why me?" Crispin didn't look up. "You were the more suitable option." Pierce leaned his shoulder against the doorframe and looked through the gap. His father sat behind the desk in shirt sleeves, one hand flat over a stack of papers, eyes down. Colin's back was to the door, his jaw visible in profile, set hard. Colin saw him. "Oh, good. You're hearing this." Pierce's eyes moved between them. "Hard not to." Crispin looked at him. "This doesn't concern you." Pierce looked at his father for a moment. Then he pushed off the frame and stepped fully into the room. His gaze dropped briefly to his own hand, the bandage, the wrapped knuckles, and something moved at the corner of his mouth. "If Colin won't do it, I will." The room went still. Colin stared, his jaw tightened. "You can't be serious." Pierce looked at him once. "That's usually when you should start paying attention." Crispin leaned back in his chair, eyes on Pierce. Unreadable. "You. Give me time." Pierce's voice stayed even. "I'll handle it." Colin dragged a hand over the back of his neck and turned. "Since when are you in a hurry to do anything for this family?" Pierce didn't look at him. "Since you started causing problems before breakfast." Colour rose in Colin's face. Crispin's gaze dropped to the bandage wrapped around Pierce's right hand. He looked at it without speaking. Not concern exactly, something older than that. Then, what happened to that? Pierce followed the look. He turned his wrist once, slow. "Cracked it. It's better now." Crispin looked at him a little longer. "You'll need more than time?" Pierce held his gaze. "I know." Crispin's voice dropped a register. "And more than your name?" "I know that too." Pierce met his eyes and held them. Crispin studied him another moment. Then he gave a single nod, small, deliberate. "Don't take too long." Pierce turned for the door. Behind him, Colin let out a short breath. "This is insane." Moira Gallagher was standing in the corridor just outside. She had been there long enough. Pierce passed her without stopping, and Colin fell into step behind him, and the corridor took all of it in quietly. Moira stepped into the room and stopped just inside the threshold. Her voice came out measured, the way it did when she was working to keep it that way. "Are we doing this again?" It wasn't quite a question. "They have to marry someone? There's no other way to handle this?" Crispin looked up at her. He didn't speak for a moment. When he did, his voice was even. "Perhaps that's hard to follow if you've never had much use for loyalty, or gratitude, or the idea that some debts don't get settled with money." Moira's chin lifted. "You're talking about our sons." His voice stayed even. "I'm talking about keeping this family intact long enough to leave something worth having. We've known the girl and her family for years." He looked at her steadily. "Or would you prefer Colin end up with that Katie?" Moira exhaled, short, sharp, through her nose, and turned for the door. Her heels crossed the floor and didn't come back. Crispin looked down at his desk. The room was quiet around him in the way it always was after a thing had been decided. Chiara was lying on her back, staring at the ceiling, which she had been doing for some time. "Pierce Gallagher," she thought. "Get out of my head." She went through it again. Arrogant. A man who moved through rooms expecting them to adjust. Who'd treated her like she was on his payroll. Had her clean his hand, wrap his knuckles, stand in his bedroom at 2 a.m. as though this were a perfectly reasonable Tuesday. Who'd walked her out of that club in front of everyone, one hand on her arm, like she was something he'd misplaced and retrieved. She got up, washed her face, and pulled on a skirt and a sweater and her rain boots. She was still talking to herself by the time she was dressed. Peter was at the kitchen table with his Sunday coffee and the specific stillness of a man who had nowhere to be. He looked up. "Morning, love. Thought you'd stay at Sadie's." Chiara considered how much to say. The answer came back fast. Almost nothing. She poured a glass of water. "Came home. Nothing like your own bed." She turned to face him. "Anything in the garden?" Peter shook his head. "Rest. Go out a bit. We cleared enough yesterday." He nodded toward the window and the low dark sky behind it. "It's going to pour." Sadie opened the door in a very large shirt with her hair at war with itself. She pulled Chiara inside by the arm without saying good morning. "What happened? Tell me." Chiara raised an eyebrow. "You're barely awake." Sadie waved a hand. "Tell me and I'll wake up." Chiara told her. Short version, 3 minutes. Sadie listened with her bedhead and her wide-open eyes and said absolutely nothing until it was over. Sadie's eyes went wide. "You went inside the actual manor." Chiara shrugged. "He wanted me to look at his hand." Sadie's eyes sharpened. "And someone actually got shot?" Chiara kept it flat. "Kneecapped. The club owner. He'd hurt a woman. Pierce dealt with it." Sadie's mouth moved. A slow, deliberate expression she didn't bother containing. "Pierce?" The name sat in her mouth a second too long. "Huh." Chiara looked at her. "Not to me. About him." Sadie let out a long, considered breath. "Dangerous. Tough. And absolutely gorgeous on top of it." She tilted her head. "Tall and dangerous and built like trouble. That is my exact type for the record." Chiara didn't look convinced. "He's arrogant, rich and convinced the world arranged itself around him." Sadie cocked her head. "He didn't act like someone who didn't know you." Chiara turned that over. Apparently he did. And she still didn't understand it. She'd been background for 3 years. Overalls, mud. Never in his sightline long enough to register. She couldn't remember him looking at her face once. Sadie's gaze traveled over her. "Why are you wearing a skirt?" She tugged at the hem. "It's just a skirt, Sadie." Sadie bumped her arm once, deliberately. "Your legs look excellent. The rain boots are doing their job." She grinned. "You look different today. Better. Don't make that face." Chiara rolled her eyes. "I look exactly the same." Sadie said nothing, which was worse. 2 kilometers from home, the rear tire went flat. 10 seconds later, the rain arrived. Not the gentle variety, but the kind that arrives with intention. Chiara got off the bike and started walking it. The boots were useful for about 4 minutes before the water found the seams. The skirt was not useful at all. By the halfway point, she was completely soaked. hair plastered to her face, boots squelching, the skirt doing nothing for the cold. A black truck came up from behind her, passed, and stopped 30 meters ahead. Kiara stopped. She recognized it. Gallagher Estate, no question. Nobody got out. She kept walking, pushing the bike, watching the truck. The window came down, those ice-blue eyes through the rain. "Get in!" Pierce's voice came over the sound of the downpour without effort. "You're completely soaked." Kiara looked at the leather interior, pale and clean, and then at Pierce. No suit today. Rain boots, a white shirt, a trench coat, and his hand still bandaged. The sight of the bandage caught her off guard, and a smile moved across her face before she could stop it. She cleared her throat. "I'm all right, thank you." His tone dropped to register. "Get in. You're already dripping." Pierce got out in one motion and took the bike from her before she'd finished the sentence. He put it in the back. She got in the front before she'd quite decided to. The seat was cold through the wet skirt. Pierce came around to her side and she immediately became aware of her boots, the mud on the floor mat, the marks already there. Pierce looked at the same spot. The heat climbed from her throat to her face. She kept her gaze forward. His words came low and matter-of-fact. "Give me your foot." She stuck out her foot before she'd decided to, because arguing with that tone felt like a project she didn't have the energy for. He pulled the boot off cleanly, his grip firm around her ankle, there and gone, then held out his hand. She gave him the other. Both went in the back. He came around and got in. Kiara looked at her feet. White socks with small red hearts printed on them. She had completely forgotten about the socks. He hadn't taken them off for the mud. She understood that now. The socks, too. His tone was even and unhurried. "Your feet'll stay wet. You'll be sick by Monday." She looked over at him. Pierce was still watching her, her wet hair against her face, the white of her legs below the soaked skirt hem, her feet in their embarrassing socks. She kept her eyes on her feet. "They're fine. It's 5 minutes." Pierce nodded and started the car. Neither of them spoke. Kiara could hear the rain on the glass, and underneath it, her own breathing. She broke the silence herself. "You shouldn't have carried the bike, with your hand like that." Pierce smiled. Not the corner shift she'd seen before, an actual full smile, brief and sudden, the one that changed his whole face. She didn't know what to do with it. "It's kind that you're thinking about it." His eyes stayed on the road. "I would have been fine without the rap. Probably not the first time something's cracked." Not his first time hitting someone either, by the sound of it. A smile caught her before she could stop it. He glanced over. "Why physiotherapy?" "I like helping people." She watched the fields going past, grey and soaked. "My marks weren't enough for medicine. Physio is still health, still useful." She stopped, then kept going because she'd already started. "And it's a real profession. I can be free. My own practice eventually, not working under anyone else's orders." She heard herself. Pierce gave her a measured, sideways look. "You're not happy? Living in the garden with your father?" Kiara lifted her chin. "I'm happy wherever my father is." The iron gates came into view through the rain. "That's not what I mean. I don't like the caste system. When people think having money makes them worth more than everyone else, it throws the whole world off balance." She said it to the window and immediately wished she hadn't. The car stopped in front of the cottage. Pierce turned toward her at the wheel. His eyes found hers and held. "Maybe sometimes the smarter people have to manage the ones who don't think things through, garden girl." Flat, unhurried, certain. Kiara pressed her lips flat. "We see it differently." She opened the door. "Maybe because you've never had to live on that side of it, you just don't get it." She got out. "Thank you for the ride." She went around to the back for the bike. Pierce was already there. He lifted it down with his good arm. She reached for the handlebars, and his hand stayed on them. His expression had closed into something harder and quieter. "That's a sharp tongue." She said nothing. He continued, low and steady. "We don't like that kind of talk from our employees." Her pulse was in her ears. She knew, she absolutely knew, that the smart thing was to say nothing, that her father had worked here for 3 years, that they lived here. "I'm not your employee." She met his eyes. "My father is." His were flat and cold, hers were hot and angry. Neither of them moved. The cottage door opened. Peter came out in his work jacket and stopped. He looked at Pierce, then at Kiara, with the careful expression of a man trying to read something he hadn't been told about. "Mr. Gallagher, everything all right?" Kiara stepped back. "Everything's fine, Dad. Mr. Gallagher was so kind to give me a lift. The tire went." She looked at Pierce. "Thank you again." The smile she put on was not the real one. She took the bike with both hands and went inside. Behind her, Pierce's voice came once across the drive. "Finley." Then the car pulled away. She sat on the edge of her bed. Her heart was still going. 5 minutes. All of that in 5 minutes. She'd said things to Pierce Gallagher she had no business saying, on Gallagher land, to a man whose patience she genuinely could not afford to test. She didn't know why he made her do it. She didn't know. Pierce's mother was on the terrace when he came through the gate, which meant she had been watching for him. Moira had a glass in one hand and the particular stillness of a woman who had already decided what she wanted to say. His gaze moved over the damp stone and settled on her. "What are you doing out here? It's been raining." Moira let a small smile touch her mouth. "Waiting for you, darling." Her fingertips brushed the rim of the glass. "I thought we might have a little time together before you disappeared back to that apartment in Dublin." "I wasn't planning to stay at all." He moved toward the door. Moira's voice followed him, light and almost idle. "That girl, the one you left at the cottage, that's Peter's daughter." Pierce stopped with his hand on the frame. He looked back at her, 1 second, flat. And then his gaze crossed the grounds to the stone cottage, its dark windows, the herbs low along the front wall. "I come every month." He pushed the door open. "Dublin is 30 minutes. Stop acting like it isn't." The door closed. Moira lifted her chin, eyes drifting back to the cottage, and turned the glass slowly in her hand. 3 weeks passed. Kiara didn't count them deliberately. She just knew, the way you knew without meaning to. How many times she had crossed the gravel drive and found her eyes going to the main house before she caught them at it. To the parked cars, to the tall windows, then away, like she'd been checking for something she wasn't willing to name. Her father had said it once, not knowing what he was handing her. Pierce ran things mostly from Dublin. He came to the estate once a month, twice, if something pulled him back. She hadn't asked anything else. The new greenhouse was her father's current project, a full glass structure on the south side, warm and humid, built to house the white camellias that Crispin Gallagher had apparently loved his whole life. Peter was meticulous about them. Staking, pruning, the soil, pH. He spoke to them low and patient, the same voice he used on anything he was trying to coax into growing. Kiara started helping without being asked. She told herself it was because he shouldn't be lifting the heavy pots alone, the other reason she wasn't examining. The Sunday market was already half packed up by the time she locked her bike to the railing, but the flower stall she wanted was still there, and so were the foxgloves. 3 pots. The color of them always caught her. That deep purple pink that almost glowed against grey stone, vertical and unassuming. The last thing you'd guess could hurt you. She settled them in her basket and started back toward the estate, jacket tied at her waist, the sun actually warm for once on the back of her neck. The jeep came up from behind without any warning at all. Bass first, so loud she felt it in her teeth, then the engine right on her shoulder, and a horn blast that hit her like a hand shove. She yanked left, and her front wheel found the verge, and she had it, just barely. And then she didn't. The road came up on her right side. Her palm took the worst of it. Her knee caught next, and she lay there a second with gravel in her hand and the jeep already gone, the music fading, and looked up to catch the plates before the bend took them. Gallagher Estate. She got up slowly, jaw locked, blood already tracking down her shin, and looked at the foxgloves. One pot had split clean open. Soil across the tarmac, roots exposed. Of course. She wheeled the bike the rest of the way without speaking to herself, which she considered a personal achievement. She found out after she'd already gotten the broken foxgloves to the potting bench and started assessing the damage. Roots drying out, the split pot unsalvageable, the other 2 still okay if she moved fast. She turned the tap and nothing came out. The pond was 20 feet out the east door, stone-rimmed, fed by the groundwater, deep enough in the center that she'd always given it a wide berth. But the shallows were clear, and a bucket would do it, and she did not have time to stand here thinking about options. She grabbed a bucket from under the bench and went out the east door. Crouched at the edge, weight forward on her good knee, the bucket angled to catch the water. The stone was slick with moss, and the surface down there was dark and still. She reached further, got the rim submerged, felt the cold race up her wrist and forearm. And then a voice came from the path directly behind her, easy and unhurried. "Hey, garden girl!" Her body reacted before her mind did, weight shifting, palm losing the stone. And there was no stone anymore, just air, and then her stomach dropped completely before the water did. Cold detonated across her whole body at once, a full-body impact that punched the air out and locked her throat. She went under. The bucket was gone. She couldn't tell which way was up for one long, unraveling second, her arms reaching for something that wasn't there, water finding her mouth when she tried to breathe. Then something closed around her ribs, hard and certain, one arm across her chest, one under her knees, and the pull was straight up, no adjustment, no hesitation. "Stop fighting me!" His voice was right at her ear. "Hold still!" She grabbed his arm with both hands and held on. The surface came back. Air came back. She choked on both. She was in his arms before she understood how. Her dress had gone thin and clingy with the water, and she could feel the solid warmth of him through it. His chest, his forearm under her knees, the cold of his soaked shirt against her shoulder. The fabric left nothing between them that it should have. She was acutely, horribly aware of it. Her hands were still clutching the front of his shirt. She made herself let go. Pierce carried her the 20 feet to the greenhouse and set her down in the chair by the potting table. He crouched in front of her until they were eye level, not touching, both hands resting on his own knees, and looked at her face. "Can you breathe?" She pressed her palm flat against her sternum and coughed again. He waited. She was still trying to get her breathing down to something that didn't sound like it belonged to someone falling apart. His eyes were cold and sharp and entirely on her, and something in her chest released, the worst of the panic coming loose before she could stop it. That release shamed her immediately. The fact that it was him, specifically him, that her body had settled for. Her jaw tightened, her throat felt scraped raw from the pond water, and she knew before she opened her mouth that whatever came out was going to sound too small. "I'm fine." It did. He shook his head once, dry. "I was going to say your knee was bleeding." He glanced at it, then back up. "Then you went in the water." His eyes held hers. "You're that scared of me?" She pulled in a breath. "I'm not scared. You came up right behind me. People don't do that." His mouth shifted into a real smile. Brief, unguarded, one that changed the whole shape of his face. She saw it and looked away, and felt heat move through her that had nothing to do with being wet. She picked at the hem of her sleeve, and tried not to think about the fact that the second she'd heard his voice, she had stopped bracing for something worse. "Every time I see you," Pierce said, "you're in some kind of trouble." "I'm not always in trouble." She kept her eyes on her sleeve. "You just show up and make it look that way." His voice dropped. "You can't swim?" Irritation flattened the word. "No?" His gaze dropped to the knee. "How did that happen?" "Road." She nodded toward the glass wall and the gravel lane beyond it, where the jeep sat parked at the edge of the grounds. "A car came up too fast. I went down." Pierce looked at the jeep and murmured, "Colin?" He drew his phone from his pocket, typed without looking at the screen, and set it face down on the bench. Kiara pushed herself to standing and went to the potting bench. The foxgloves that had survived sat in their intact pots, upright and oblivious. The split one had scattered badly, soil and stems across the wood, and she started gathering what she could. "I'll have to go back to the market." She turned a stem in her fingers. The leaves were intact. "Some of these might recover if I get them back in soil today." Pierce came to stand beside her. He looked at the south bench, the white camellias precisely arranged. Then at what she was holding. His eyes moved to her hands. "Those should be my father's. What are those?" She set the stem down without looking up. "Foxgloves, my favorites." He studied the color for a moment, his gaze moving to the scattered stems across the wood. "Good color. Delicate-looking things. Look at them, all fallen out when the pot broke. She ran her thumb slowly along one of the soft purple bells. They're elegant, but poisonous. You can make a deadly poison from these, if you actually put it in your mouth. She set the stem down carefully. It can paralyze you. Pierce's gaze moved from the flower to her face, one side of his mouth lifted. Sounds like you found exactly the right flower for yourself. Kiara swallowed. She looked up at him. He wasn't looking at the foxgloves. Neither of them moved for a moment. The warm glass air between them, her wet clothes, the roots she'd nearly drowned for still sitting on the bench between them. Then he stepped back. His eyes dropped to her knee. Put antiseptic on that. Antibiotics tonight. The pond water isn't clean. He turned for the east door. Take care of yourself. Kiara watched him go and had the humiliating thought that she already wanted to know when she'd see him again. He reached the east door and tried the handle. Nothing. He tried again, all his weight behind it, and the door held. What is this? Kiara came up beside him and tried, and the frame held solid, swollen shut with humidity and her father's meticulous weatherproofing. Pierce turned toward the grounds and raised his voice through the glass. Aiden. He waited, then tried again. Colin. The greenhouse gave nothing back. Kiara crossed her arms over her wet front. It doesn't carry sound. My father had the panels fitted for heat retention. He looked at her, then at his soaked shirt, his hands, the state of both of them. Then I suppose we'd better hope neither of us gets ill. He located the electric heater along the south wall and crossed to it, crouched, turned the dial. The coils went orange. He pulled one of the wooden chairs around to face it and sat. He looked at her over his shoulder. Are you going to stand there? 2 fingers tapped the empty chair beside him. Come here. Sit. Still giving orders, she thought. Still acting like people moved because he said so. She crossed the room and took the other chair. Pierce leaned back in his chair, one arm loose over the rest, and looked at her. Just looked, steady and unhurried, like he had nowhere else to be and all the time in the world to spend it on her face. Kiara looked at her hands. The wet dress was cooling against her skin now, and she had no idea what to do with her legs, her arms, any part of herself. Everything felt too visible. She shifted slightly and immediately wished she hadn't. She was locked in a greenhouse, soaking wet. Alone with Pierce Gallagher, who had just pulled her out of a pond and was now watching her like she was something that required close study. She didn't know what came next. Every exchange they had ever had, every short, clipped, friction-filled minute of it, had ended with her saying something she hadn't planned to say. A retort, a challenge, something that landed wrong and burned after. She was not going to be the one who opened her mouth first. Not this time. Her tongue found the inside of her cheek and stayed there. The silence stretched. Kiara kept her eyes on the middle distance, the potting bench, the terracotta pots lined up along the south wall, the condensation thickening on the glass, anywhere that wasn't him. Pierce hadn't moved. She could feel his gaze the way she could feel the heater, a steady, directed warmth she couldn't quite ignore, no matter how deliberately she tried. The space between them had tightened without either of them doing anything. Silence was doing it. She was aware of her own breathing in a way she hadn't been a minute ago. She shifted in her chair and immediately regretted it. The dress had no business being this clingy. She had no mirror. She decided she was better off not knowing. She muttered it before she'd quite meant to. Why hasn't anyone come? Pierce answered anyway, his voice even. Colin's with his girlfriend. My parents are out. He glanced once toward the cottage end of the grounds. Your father's probably asleep by now. Aiden will notice I'm gone soon enough and start looking. Kiara turned to look at him. Of course. The flatness in her voice carried more than she'd meant it to. He glanced at her. Your graduation. It's coming up? She nodded once. 3 weeks. He leaned back in his chair. Almost done with school? Ready for the real thing? She made a small sound, not quite yes, not quite no, and pressed her tongue against her back teeth. Pierce was quiet for a moment. She could feel him watching her, steady, unblinking, his attention fixed entirely on her. You've gone quiet on me. His voice carried something dry underneath it. No sharp remarks, no corrections. Did you swallow your tongue, garden girl? She looked up. His mouth wasn't smiling, but his eyes were. A brightness she hadn't seen before, something almost mocking sitting right behind it, like he was genuinely entertained and had decided to let her see it. She didn't know what to do with that. The cold version had been easier. She said nothing. Pierce leaned forward slightly in his chair. "You could at least say thank you. I did pull you out of a pond." The words were out before she'd decided on them. "You frightened me into it, Mr. Gallagher." The full smile arrived, real this time, showing teeth. "There it is." Kiara looked away first. Her arms crossed over her chest and stayed there. Pierce, unhelpfully, reached down and pulled off one shoe, then the other. He peeled off his socks and set them aside with the same matter-of-fact efficiency he applied to everything, like a man settling in for a long wait. Kiara pressed her lips together. They had started to tremble slightly, and she was not going to let him see that. He rose from his chair. He crouched in front of her, close, level, his forearms resting on his knees, and looked at her feet. "Give me your foot." Her pulse reacted before she did. "I'm fine." She tucked one foot back. "Honestly." His voice dropped one register. "Give me your foot." She extended it like someone who had lost an argument they hadn't started. She didn't know why he'd said it so sharply. One moment his eyes had been almost laughing, and then the order had come out hard and flat, and she'd moved before she'd decided to. She noted this with irritation. She genuinely did not like this man. He pulled the boot off cleanly, then the sock. He took the other foot without asking again, then his hands closed around her left foot and he began working warmth back into it. Slow, thorough, the hands of someone solving a problem rather than offering comfort. Her breathing forgot its rhythm. She found it again and said nothing. She endured the feeling without deciding what it was. "Told you." His eyes stayed down. "Cold feet make you sick." His gaze caught on the boot he'd set aside. He turned it over once, ran his thumb along the side where the rubber had started to separate from the upper. "The sides are worn through. They're letting in water." Kiara lifted her chin. "I love those boots." Pierce looked at her for a moment. Then he set the boot down and went back to her feet without another word. She looked at his hands working over her feet. The bandage was gone. Her voice dropped without warning. "You took the bandage off?" "Days ago." He didn't look up. It was fine. He spotted a small bottle of water on the shelf to his left, reached for it, unscrewed the cap, and tilted it carefully over the cut on her knee. She sucked in a breath at the cold. His voice was matter-of-fact. "Shouldn't get infected." She nodded, not trusting her voice right now. His hands had genuinely warmed her feet. She was aware of that. She was also aware that the warmth had not stayed only in her feet. It had moved upward, slow, uninvited. And her breathing had shifted, and her stomach had tightened, and the place where his fingers had closed around her ankle felt different from the rest of her skin, still carrying the pressure of it. She was still trying to decide what to call it when the laughter arrived, female, high, bright. And then the door swung open, and the damp afternoon light flooded in, and Colin Gallagher stepped through it with a woman beside him, and both of them stopped dead at the sight inside. Colin's face moved through several expressions in about 1 second. He landed somewhere between entertained and startled, his eyes dropping immediately to Kiara's bare feet and Pierce's hands. "Hey!" His voice came out careful, almost delighted. "Pierce, what exactly is going on in here?" Pierce got to his feet. "We got locked in. I was waiting for Aiden." He glanced at the woman beside Colin, young, polished, wearing something expensive, with the kind of permanent half-smile that seemed designed for maximum effect. "Hello, Katie." Katie's eyes moved over the scene with undisguised interest. Colin's hand found Katie's hip and dropped lower. Katie giggled. "Thought we'd find somewhere a bit more interesting than home." The flush started at Kiara's throat and didn't stop until it reached her chest. Kiara got to her feet, grabbed her boots off the floor, and looked at Pierce long enough to get the words out. "Thank you, Mr. Gallagher." She was moving before she'd finished the sentence. Behind her, Pierce stood with one hand in his pocket and watched her go. She was almost through when Colin's voice came from just behind her. "Hey, garden girl." The tone was perfectly pleasant. "Entrance got a bit muddy on the way in. Staff's off today. Think you could sort it out?" Kiara stopped. She stood in the doorway with both boots in her hand and thought, with complete clarity, about how satisfying it would be to turn around and hit him. She thought about it in some detail. Then Pierce's voice came from behind her, quiet and final. "Colin." Pierce looked at his brother. "Kiara isn't the help. Her father works for us. She's a physiotherapist. You made the mess. Clean it yourself." The composure in it was worse than any heat would have been. Kiara turned. Something moved through her chest. Quick, involuntary, gone before she could name it. She looked at Pierce across the length of the greenhouse. She didn't plan what her face did. Whatever it did it without her permission, and she hoped it wasn't as readable as it felt. Pierce gave her the smallest nod. His chin moved toward the open door. "Go." She didn't look back. She was almost running by the time she hit the path to the cottage, wet socks on cold grass, boots still in her hand. Her chest felt strange and too warm, and she couldn't account for any of it. Not the heat, not the way his words kept sitting there, not the thing his hands had done to her that had nothing to do with her feet. Pierce Gallagher. She thought it like a curse. "I hate you for making me feel this way." 2 days later, Kiara nearly walked into it. The package was sitting right outside the cottage door, large, square, wrapped in brown paper and tied with a ribbon that had no business being that neat at 8 in the morning. A small card was tucked under the bow. She picked it up. Her own name, in clean print. Kiara Finley. She looked around. The grounds were empty. The gravel drive was quiet. Whoever had left this hadn't wanted to be seen doing it. She carried it inside and set it on the kitchen table and cut the ribbon with scissors and opened it. Hunter rain boots, khaki green, brand new, still with the tissue paper in the toes, catching the morning light like they'd come directly out of a shop window. A smile moved across her face before she could stop it. It left just as quickly. She sat back and looked at them. He must have ordered them. Or had someone order them. Either way, there they were. Expensive and practical and sitting in her kitchen like a question she hadn't agreed to answer. She reached out and touched one with her fingertips. The rubber was cool and smooth and exactly the right size. Her hand wanted to stay there. She pulled it back. She didn't know how he'd known her size, and she didn't want to think about what it meant that he had. One part of her wanted to pull them on immediately. The other part wouldn't let her. She was not going to accept a gift from the Gallaghers, and that was the end of it. She put them back in the box, put the box in the wardrobe, and closed the door on it. Then she picked up her old boots, the ones with the worn sides that let the water in, shouldered her bag, and walked out into the morning with 6 minutes to catch the bus. Across the estate, the black Bentley sat just inside the iron gates, engine idling, positioned so the driver had a clear line of sight to the cottage path. Aidan watched the rearview mirror. "Miss Finley's out, boss." In the back seat, Pierce looked up from his phone. Kiara was coming down the path, her bag over one shoulder, walking at the pace she always kept when she was cutting it close. He could see from here that she was wearing the same boots she'd had on in the greenhouse. The corner of his mouth shifted. He shook his head once. "Stubborn," he murmured. "She'll walk herself into the ground over pride." Aidan's eyes stayed on the mirror. "You want me to have someone follow her, boss?" Pierce watched until the path was empty. "No." He looked back at his phone. "We're going to Dublin." He typed without hesitation. "Sarah, on my way. Get ready. I'm taking you to lunch." And set the phone face down on the seat without waiting for the reply. The Bentley turned. 2 weeks went by without Pierce Gallagher anywhere on the grounds. In the mornings, when she crossed the grounds to check the greenhouse before college, Kiara kept her eyes on the path. At weekends, when she worked beside her father, she kept her attention on the beds and the borders and whatever needed doing. She was careful not to let her gaze drift toward the main house, toward the drive, toward the iron gates. She was not always successful. The boots were still in the wardrobe. She hadn't touched them since the first morning. She'd decided, after some careful thought, that there were 3 possible courses of action. Throw them at his head the next time she saw him, return them with a polite note and the original packaging, or accept them without comment. She had not yet been able to settle on which of these would be most satisfying. The question kept surfacing at inconvenient moments, mostly because it required imagining seeing him again, which she was working very hard not to do. "You haven't touched them." Sadie said it without preamble. She was sitting sideways on the bus seat, watching Kiara with her chin in her hand. "Still in the box?" Kiara stared out the window. "Still in the box." Sadie exhaled through her nose. Kiara. Kiara kept her gaze forward. Don't. Sadie watched her. You like him. I find him infuriating. Kiara turned from the window. He's arrogant. He talks to people like they're furniture. And I watched him shoot a man in a nightclub, which is something I haven't actually forgotten. Sadie shrugged one shoulder. The man deserved it. She swallowed. That's not really the point, Sadie. Then what is the point? Sadie tilted her head. Because, from where I'm sitting, your father's employer bought you a very expensive pair of boots because yours were falling apart, and you've been tying yourself in knots about it for 2 weeks. She paused, just long enough to make it count. You're not offended by the boots, Kiara. You're terrified you like the Gallagher. Kiara looked down at her hands. I'm a logical person, Sadie. Sadie bumped her shoulder once. You haven't touched those boots in 2 weeks because you care what he thinks. That's not logic, darling. That's something else. Anyway, what are you wearing to graduation? Kiara let that one go. I've been looking at second-hand. Haven't found anything yet. Sadie's face settled into something firm and fond. My wardrobe, you know that. Kiara smiled. It didn't quite reach her eyes. I know. Thank you. That Sunday, she was in the greenhouse alone, working through a new planting while her father took his afternoon rest. The white camellias along the south bench were doing well. Full heads, no rot at the stems, the soil holding moisture the way it should. She was working her way along them with the spray bottle when the greenhouse door opened. Crispin Gallagher didn't announce himself. He simply came in, closed the door behind him, and stood looking at the flowers with the settled quiet of a man who was used to being somewhere without explaining it. Kiara straightened. Sir, I was just doing the camellias. He nodded, his eyes still on the blooms. I can see that from the window. Peter does good work. He glanced at her. So do you. She watched him cross to the bench and reach out, touching one of the white heads very lightly with 2 fingers. Careful, deliberate, like he was greeting something rather than examining it. She hesitated. Can I ask you something, sir? He looked at her. Why white camellias, not roses, not orchids? Crispin studied her for a moment, and his expression shifted into something she hadn't seen on any Gallagher face before, genuine surprise. Nobody's ever asked me that. Kiara kept her voice quiet. Flowers have always seemed to me like they reflect something in the person who loves them. I think people are drawn to the one that fits them, without quite knowing why. He held her gaze for a moment. Then he looked back at the flowers. My mother was holding a bunch of white camellias when she was killed. I was 8 years old. The greenhouse was quiet around them. His voice came low. I've grown them ever since. Kiara didn't reach for anything to say. After a moment, Crispin turned back to her. So, if your theory holds, what does it say about the person who loves them? She thought about it honestly. Camellias are restrained, composed. They don't open all at once. They hold their shape. I think someone who loves them tends to carry things without showing them. Strong, but private. A strength that doesn't need anyone watching. She looked down at the nearest bloom. Crispin had moved to stand beside her at some point, close enough that his voice came quiet when he spoke. You're a clever girl, Kiara. Deeper than you let on. She smiled, and it caught her off guard, the warmth of it. He made his way back to the door at his own pace, no hurry in it. She watched him go and thought, not for the first time and not proudly, that there was at least one Gallagher in that house worth knowing. The thought lasted maybe 4 seconds, because the next thing that surfaced, without her permission, was the feeling of warm hands working the cold out of her feet and a pair of ice-blue eyes that had stayed on her face long after they should have looked away. She turned back to the camellias and told herself, firmly, to stop thinking about him. The restaurant was quiet at this hour, the lunchtime crowd thinning out around them. Pierce and Sarah had taken their usual table, corner away from the door, and the bottle between them was already half down. Sarah set her glass on the table and studied him across the rim. Haven't seen your family in a while. Everyone well? Fine. Pierce set the menu aside and didn't pick it up again. My father wants Colin married. There's a family arrangement. Old connection. Colin won't go through with it. Sarah tilted her glass slowly. Poor girl, whoever she is. I told my father I'd do it instead. Sarah went still. She turned the glass in her fingers, once, twice, not drinking, just turning it. You. Her eyes came up to his. Her voice dropped a register. You and marriage. Pierce held her gaze. Yes. He leaned back in his chair. Maybe the time had come. She studied him. You sound like there's an obligation involved. His voice stayed even. There is, in a sense, a long family friendship, a debt. No one uses that word, but that's what it is. Think of it as a partnership. Sarah's chin lifted slightly. Does the girl know? He picked up his glass and set it down again. Not yet. Her eyes didn't leave his face. Do you know her? Pierce turned toward the window. Yes, I've known her a long time. Sarah watched him. He kept his eyes on the window. You're becoming very secretive, Pierce. His eyes came back to her. I'm being careful. She considered him. He reached for his own glass and set it down without drinking. When we leave here, I want to go somewhere, a shop. She's around your size. His voice was even. I want to buy her something for her graduation. Sarah raised her eyebrows, then she lifted her glass and drank the rest of her wine in one clean motion. Pierce! Her voice dropped slightly. She set the glass down. For one terrible second just now, I thought you were going to ask me to marry you. The corner of his mouth shifted. I can't marry you, Sarah. She pressed a hand flat against her chest. I know. Don't even... His expression didn't change. You're my cousin. Her eyes closed briefly. There it is. She shook her head slowly. Then she laughed. Short, genuine, relieved. Thank God. Honestly. Thank God. She reached for the bottle, refilled her glass, and turned back to him, with the smile still in place. All right, then. She set the bottle down. Let's go shopping, cousin. Chiara stood in front of the open wardrobe and did the inventory for the third time that morning. 4 days to graduation. 2 work shirts. A cardigan that had seen better winters. The dress she'd worn to Sadie's cousin's wedding 2 years ago. Navy, perfectly fine, already ruled out for exactly that reason. A pair of black trousers, her good jeans. She closed the wardrobe door. She'd been telling herself since September that she'd sorted out. It was now Thursday. Peter appeared in the doorway behind her, still in his work jacket, a mug in each hand. He stood there watching her, quietly, with the patience of a man who saw more than he said. She turned and manufactured a smile. Hungry, Dad? He came in and set one mug on the dresser beside her. Then he put his arms around her, mug and all, and held on for a moment. Chiara, his voice was low, you've been turning down extra shifts to help me on weekends, and you won't take a penny from me. He stepped back. Let me take you somewhere today, a proper shop. Get you something for Saturday. She shook her head. There's no need. Honestly. It's one evening. I'll find something. We're not short. He wrapped both hands around his mug. No rent, steady wage. There's money sitting there doing nothing. His voice stayed gentle. You've earned something of your own, love, and if you don't let me do this, I'll be genuinely sad about it. You know I will. She did know. She'd watched him be sad about things before, without complaint, without making a fuss, in a way that was somehow worse than if he had. Her throat pulled tight. She nodded once. All right. Peter smiled, properly, all the way up. He lifted his mug. Good. One more thing before we go. Crispin Gallagher. He mentioned wanting a word with you. She frowned. With me? Why? He shook his head. He didn't say, love. Maybe something to do with your degree. You know how he is, doesn't always explain himself. Fine. She set her mug down. I'll go now, then. She had been inside the main house once. Standing at the front door and raising the knocker felt different in daylight. More formal, more exposed, without the cover of darkness or emergency to make it reasonable. The door opened almost immediately. The housekeeper knew who she was and why she was there without being told, which was its own kind of unsettling. She stepped back and gestured toward the stairs. I'll take you up to Mr. Gallagher's study. They went through the entrance hall and up the staircase. Kiara kept her eyes forward. From the far end of the terrace beyond the tall windows, she could see Moira Gallagher, standing very still, watching the grounds, or watching the door. The moment Kiara came into view, Moira's gaze settled on her, flat, giving away nothing. Kiara smiled at her. She got nothing back. Something along her spine registered it before she did. Not fear, just the particular awareness of being assessed and dismissed in the same second. She turned back to the stairs and kept climbing. At the top, the housekeeper turned left. Kiara followed, then caught herself glancing back over her shoulder just briefly toward the right-hand corridor and the far end of it. She pulled her eyes back before they'd quite finished looking. Crispin Gallagher's study was at the end of the left wing. The door was already open. Dark mahogany paneling, tall shelves, the smell of old paper and something heavier underneath it. He was sitting behind a desk that looked like it had been making decisions for 100 years, and he looked considerably more formidable here than he had in the greenhouse. Kiara stepped inside and stopped 2 paces in. "You wanted to see me, Mr. Gallagher?" "Closer." He gestured toward the chair across from him. "Sit down, please." She sat at the edge of the chair, spine straight, hands in her lap. Crispin studied her for a moment without speaking. She held his gaze, then dropped it, then brought it back, caught between the 2 options and not quite committing to either. "Graduation this weekend." He said it the way he said most things, like a fact being confirmed, not a question being asked. She nodded once. "Yes, sir." He leaned forward slightly, his hands folded on the desk. "And after? What are you planning?" Kiara straightened without meaning to. "A placement first. Most likely a physio clinic. I've already sent a few applications, and I'm considering a postgraduate depending on how the next year goes." Crispin took his time. "This family supports people who apply themselves, Kiara. Whatever is said about the Gallagher name, and I know what's said, we've done a great deal for this community. That's not nothing." She kept her face still. He held her gaze. "You know my sons, Pierce and Colin." Her hands stayed flat in her lap. For a second she was back in that greenhouse, blue eyes steady on hers, hands careful around her foot, an attention that pressed into her awareness and stayed there. She pressed the inside of her cheek against her teeth. "I've met them, yes. Our family has been involved with the institution since my father's time." Crispin glanced at the window, then back. "Having you come through there, and do well, reflects well on all of us, your father included." She smiled at that. It wasn't a difficult smile to produce. She meant it. Crispin reached forward and pressed a small button on his desk. A voice came through a speaker she hadn't noticed. He leaned toward it. "The package." Kiara's hands stilled. She kept her expression calm and waited. The door opened. The housekeeper came in carrying a large flat box, beautifully wrapped, expensive, even in the packaging. Crispin directed her with a glance, and the box was placed in Kiara's lap. She looked at it, then at him. "Sir, a graduation gift." His voice was measured. "If it isn't to your taste, you're free to exchange it. But I'd like you to take it." Kiara's throat tightened. "I can't—" The sentence didn't finish properly. There was really no need. Crispin raised one hand, not unkindly. "Kiara, learning to receive well is part of learning to move through the world. People who can't accept anything rarely build anything that lasts. This is something you've earned." His voice dropped one register. "And there will be more things you earn, and you'll take those too. Do you understand me?" Kiara's hands stayed on the edge of the box. She didn't look at it. She looked at him. When she spoke, her voice was quieter than she'd intended. "Sir, with respect." Crispin's eyes came up. "I'd like to decline. I haven't earned a gift of this size from this family. I've done no work for you. My father has. And he's been paid fairly for it, and he's been grateful, and that's the end of it on our side." Her voice stayed quiet, but it didn't waver. "I appreciate the gesture. I won't take it." She stood, the box in her hands, and moved to set it on the edge of his desk. "Stop." The word came without heat. She stopped, the box halfway to the desk. Crispin straightened in his chair, his hands folded again on the desk, and looked at her with an expression she hadn't seen on a Gallagher before. Not warmth, not displeasure. Something closer to attention, the full, undivided kind, like she had finally said something worth hearing. "Sit down." She sat, the box back in her lap. "You're telling me you don't want to be indebted to this family?" His voice was careful. "Is that it?" Chiara met his gaze. "Yes, sir." "Good." Crispin settled back. "I don't want you indebted to this family either. I don't give gifts that come with strings. Not to you, not to your father, not to anyone who works this estate. If I did, I wouldn't still have people who'd stayed 20 years. He pushed forward in his chair slightly. "So, let me say this clearly, and then you can decide." She waited. "This is not payment for your father's work. He's been paid, in full, for 3 years. This is not a down payment on future favor. I don't operate that way." He leaned back. "This is what I'd give any young woman on this estate who I'd watched put herself through a difficult degree with no help from anyone, on the day before she walks across a stage to collect it. Nothing more than that." The room was quiet. Chiara looked at the box, then at him. "Then I'll accept it on those terms. Not as a Gallagher gift, as a neighbor's gesture. I'd like that to be understood between us." Crispin's mouth lifted at one corner, small, private, almost to himself. "Understood." His eyes stayed on her a moment longer. "You're sharper than I gave you credit for. Your father raised you well." Her throat moved. She didn't trust what might come out if she answered, so she didn't. Chiara rose, the box in her arms. "Thank you, Mr. Gallagher, for the gesture, and for letting me say what I came in here not knowing I was going to say." She walked back through the house with the box in her arms, past the portraits and the polished floors, and the rooms that no one seemed to actually live in. Moira was no longer on the terrace. The entrance hall was empty. Outside, the gravel was bright in the afternoon light. She walked the path back to the cottage, the box heavier than it looked, Crispin's words still sitting somewhere in her chest where she couldn't quite put them down. She set the box on the kitchen table and stood looking at it. The hunter boots were still in the wardrobe. The dress fit like it had been made for her. Chiara stood in front of the mirror and took that in, deep burgundy, structured at the waist, the fabric falling clean and smooth to the knee. There was a slit, higher than she would have chosen herself, and the first time she'd stepped into it, she'd felt a flash of heat across the back of her neck. The dress didn't care. It just sat there on her body and did its job. The shoes were their own event. Strappy-heeled sandals in a warm tan, the kind that made the whole thing look intentional rather than assembled. She turned slightly to one side, then the other. The color kept pulling at her. Burgundy, deep and warm and nothing like anything she owned. It was starting to feel like her color. She was fairly sure that wasn't a coincidence. She bit her lip. The slit was higher than she would have picked. Peter appeared in the doorway and stopped. "Oh, Chiara." His voice had gone soft. "You look... love. You look wonderful." She turned from the mirror. "I'm not sure I should have accepted it, Dad. The whole thing." She smoothed the fabric at her sides. "It doesn't sit right with me." Peter stepped into the room, hands in his jacket pockets. "You've got a boss who wanted to mark the occasion for his groundsman's daughter. You've worked that garden and that greenhouse for 3 years alongside me, and not once have you asked for anything." He shook his head. "Why wouldn't you take it?" Chiara looked at the mirror again. The woman in it didn't look like someone who worked in overalls and rain boots. She nodded slowly. "All right." Peter's mouth curved. "Good." She reached for the small bag she'd borrowed from Sadie. The dress problem had solved itself. She hadn't seen that coming. The sun was going down behind the old faculty building, throwing long gold across the lawn, and the chairs were filling up fast. Someone had strung small lights along the hedges. The sky was holding, barely, and everyone in the crowd seemed to be privately negotiating with it. Chiara stood with her father and Sadie at the edge of the gathering, her graduation robe open over the burgundy dress, and let Sadie angle them into the light for photographs she would probably never frame, but would keep anyway. "Chin up," Sadie said, phone raised. "Both of you. Peter, you look like you're being interviewed." Peter laughed, and Sadie kept going until she'd caught one when nobody was blinking. The Dean took the podium as the sky deepened to the colour of the lawn. He was brief as Deans went. "Welcome, thank you, distinguished guests." And then he paused, visibly pleased with himself. "This year we are honoured to have with us a representative of one of the institution's founding families. The Gallaghers have supported this college since its earliest days, and they've informed us they intend to expand that support considerably." He smiled at the crowd. "We're very glad to have them with us this evening." Kiara glanced at Sadie. Sadie glanced back. Around them, the murmur moved through the rows. Not hostile, not entirely warm either. The Gallaghers were known for what they gave, and for other things too. Things people referenced carefully, in lowered voices, when the name came up. Finn leaned across Sadie from the row behind, keeping his voice down, but not quite enough. "Excellent. I was just thinking, why bother with the job market when I could go straight into the harbour operations? Or the other thing." Sadie's elbow found his ribs. "Kiara's father works for them." Finn settled back. "I know. I'm being supportive." Kiara wasn't listening. She was scanning the front of the space, the stage, the small cluster of suited figures off to the side, carefully not looking for anyone. She felt it before she saw it, the crowd's attention pulling toward the stage like something had shifted the air. Pierce Gallagher walked on. He was in a dark suit, no tie, and he moved to the microphone with the ease of someone who had never needed to fill a room. He simply occupied it. He stood there without speaking. His gaze moved across the crowd. Kiara was in the second row. She bit down on the inside of her lip and kept her face forward. It had been a month and a half since the greenhouse. She hadn't seen him at all. She wasn't going to think about what her pulse was doing. "This institution matters to my family. Several of us studied here. We've been glad to support the scholarship program, and tonight I can tell you that support is increasing." He looked across the crowd again. "I've also been asked to mention that we're establishing a placement service for this year's graduates. We know the first year out is the hardest. We want to make it a little less so." He let the quiet hold. "Congratulations to all of you. Go and do something worth doing." Applause moved through the garden. Beside Kiara, Sadie leaned close. "Power always gets the room." She was already clapping. Names began. Kiara watched the seats empty ahead of her, one by one. She sat with her hands in her lap and her jaw tight and kept her eyes off the front of the stage. Her name came. She stood. The walk was maybe 15 steps and felt like a lot more. She kept her chin up and moved past the chairs at the edge of the stage, close enough to catch the line of a dark sleeve in her peripheral vision, and kept moving. She heard him stand, the shift of weight, the quiet of it. At the end of the line, she turned. Pierce was there. Her diploma in his hand, his eyes already on her face, her throat closed. She crossed to him and held out her hand, and he put the diploma into it. His fingers brushing hers in the exchange, warm, deliberate, and held on. Just a moment passed when he should have let go. She felt it move up her wrist before she could stop it. His face gave nothing away. His eyes gave a little. Pierce's voice came low, only for her. "Kiara, congratulations." The applause was going somewhere behind her, the lawn, the lights, the whole evening still moving, everything except the space between them, which had gone completely still. "Thank you," she said. Neither of them moved. Then she did. She walked off the stage and didn't look back. Kiara dropped back into her seat and stared straight ahead at the stage. Sadie turned to her slowly, eyes wide, voice kept deliberately low. "What was that?" "Nothing." The word came out too fast and she knew it. Sadie tilted her head. "He held your hand for about 4 seconds longer than everyone else's." Kiara kept her eyes forward. "He was handing me the diploma." On her other side, her father had turned back to the stage. She could see the line of his jaw, the small movement of his throat as he swallowed. He said nothing. Nobody did. The reception hall was too warm, too loud, and exactly what she needed. Peter kissed her cheek at the door, told her he'd have food waiting, and left with the particular dignity of a man who understood when he wasn't meant to be somewhere. Kiara watched him go, and then let Sadie pull her inside. Sadie stopped 2 steps in, took a full look at her. and then looked again. "You said you didn't have anything to wear." Kiara kept moving toward the drinks table. "I found something." "You found—" Sadie caught up with her. "Kiara, this dress is not something you find. This dress is something someone buys you." She angled her head. "Who bought you this dress?" Kiara poured herself a glass of something sparkling and took a sip before answering. "It was a gift." Sadie's eyes sharpened. "From graduation gift." She picked up a second glass and pressed it into Sadie's hand. "Drink something." Sadie took the glass but didn't drink. "You're not telling me everything. Nothing is happening." She said it calmly, and almost meant it. And then she was looking at the far end of the room without quite deciding to. The door, the cluster of suited figures near the entrance, and she pulled her attention back before it landed anywhere. Sadie noticed. Sadie always noticed. But she let it go, which was either kindness or strategy, and Kiara didn't examine which. An hour in, she'd stopped looking for him. The music had shifted into something easier, and Sadie had found her way to a group from the speech therapy cohort, and Finn had claimed a corner with 2 pints and the settled look of a man whose evening required nothing further of him. Kiara was dancing, just moving with the music and letting it be simple. And she was warm from the wine and the room and the evening, and she had stopped counting the minutes since she'd walked off that stage. She'd had, if she was being honest, probably 1 drink more than was strictly wise. But she'd graduated, and she was 23, and the alternative was standing very still, thinking about a pair of ice-blue eyes, and the half-second before he let go, so she took another sip and kept dancing. That was when Ron Kelly appeared at her elbow. He was one of those lads she'd seen around for years and never thought about, good-looking in an obvious way, and fully aware of it, standing with his weight back and his glass loose in one hand. Finley. His eyes moved over her with the slow confidence of someone who hadn't been told no recently. "You look good tonight. How did I not notice you at school?" Kiara moved with the music and said nothing. "You didn't need to. Bit of lipstick and suddenly you've notions, Finley." He grinned for the 2 lads behind him. Sadie appeared at her shoulder. "Ron, back off. Nobody's talking to you." He didn't look at Sadie. His hand came up and closed around Kiara's wrist, pulling. "One dance, Kiara." His hand closed around her upper arm. She looked down at it, his fingers, the grip, exactly where they'd landed, and then up at him. "So, it takes a dress and some lipstick for you to see a girl." She kept her voice level. "Why would I waste a dance on someone that shallow, Ron?" He laughed. "The performing kind." "Because, sweetheart," the hand stayed where it was, "me even looking at you is a chance. There are plenty of girls here who'd take it." His other hand moved to her waist, and he leaned slightly, his mouth angling toward her neck. "Jasmine, is it? From your garden?" The 2 men behind him thought this was very funny. Near the door, someone moved. Kiara pulled his hand off her waist with both of hers. Her voice had gone cold and flat. "You picked the wrong girl, Ron Kelly. Men like you have never once interested me." Ron's smile didn't drop. It just changed quality. "What matters here isn't what you want, Finley. It's what I—" She slapped him. Not enough to knock him down. Enough that nobody missed it. "Back off!" Her voice was shaking slightly. Not with fear, with fury, which was a different thing entirely. "I won't let you ruin this night." Ron stepped back. The smile was gone now. "You're going to regret that." Finn moved in from the left, not rushing but putting himself between them. "Ron, enough. Walk away." Sadie pushed Ron's shoulder from the other side. "Get out!" Then a hand closed around the back of Ron's neck. Not Finn's, a bigger hand, and a different grip entirely, the kind that didn't need to squeeze to make the point. Ron's whole body went rigid, his feet lifting slightly off the ground. Pierce Gallagher said nothing. He just held him there, and the 2 men who'd been laughing a minute ago were already gone. His voice, when it came, was quiet. That was the frightening part. Pierce's eyes dropped to Ron's face. "Did nobody ever teach you how to speak to a woman?" Ron made a sound that was not a word. Kiara's breathing had gone shallow. She could feel her own pulse in her throat, in the arm Ron had touched, in the tips of her fingers. She was watching Pierce, the stillness of him, the controlled quiet, the part of him she'd only glimpsed before. And she couldn't move, and she wasn't trying to. The place on her upper arm where Ron had gripped her was starting to burn. She noticed it now, warm and specific, the exact shape of his fingers. She pressed her own hand over it without deciding to. Pierce walked Ron backward, far enough, then he let go. Ron didn't look back. Pierce straightened his cuff. He turned to Kiara and his face was composed, the way it always became after something like that, like a door closing. And he held her gaze. "Car's outside when you're ready." The words came low, back to even. "Take your time." He turned and walked back through the door. The noise came back the second he was gone. Sadie's hand found Kiara's arm. Her voice was barely above a whisper. "Kiara." She waited. "You have something going on with this man and you haven't told me." "I don't." The words came out steadily, which surprised her. Finn stared at the door. "Right, remind me never to annoy that man." Kiara turned toward the drinks table. "Don't be ridiculous, Sadie." Her eyes went to the door once. Just once. She didn't move, but her mind was already in the car. 15 minutes later, Kiara found Sadie near the bar and leaned in close. "I'm going." Sadie pulled back with a look that said she wasn't surprised but wasn't happy about it. "Already? There's an after-party." Kiara shook her head. "I've had enough." Sadie's eyes moved slowly over the burgundy dress. She clicked her tongue. "Such a waste. You finally wear something like that? And you're leaving early." Kiara kissed her cheek before the conversation could grow teeth. "See you tomorrow." Finn lifted his glass. "Night, graduate." She was out the door before either of them could say another word. The cold hit her face hard enough to wake her up, and not nearly hard enough to steady her. The Bentley was waiting under the lamps at the edge of the drive, dark and polished and impossible to mistake. Her feet picked up pace on their own. Before she reached it, Aidan was already out of the driver's seat. He came around the front and held the rear door open. He nodded once. "Miss Finley." Kiara slowed for half a second, caught off guard by it, by being expected. Then she looked inside. Pierce was on the phone. The moment he saw her, he stopped listening to whoever was on the other end. "I'll call you later." He ended the call and lowered the phone into his lap. His eyes found hers through the open door, and one finger lifted, a single, slow motion toward the seat beside him. "Get in, Kiara." She did. The door shut behind her. Only the engine made any sound. Kiara sat carefully, one hand wrapped around the small evening bag in her lap. The leather was warm. So was her face. She cleared her throat. "Mr. Gallagher?" It came out stiffer than she'd meant. "What exactly is all this?" Pierce said nothing, watching her calmly, patiently, as if he had all night and already knew she'd talk first. His silences always did this. She turned toward him. "You were waiting outside for me. Why?" Something shifted at the corner of his mouth. Her fingers tightened on the clasp of her bag. She looked at him. The boots. The package on the doorstep. That was you. He still didn't answer. The silence was starting to feel like a wall she kept walking into. If it was kind, but I don't want them. The smile came properly this time, slow, certain, and infuriating. She straightened her spine. "Mr. Gallagher, why are you—" His hand came up between them, not touching her, just enough to stop the sentence. Then he lowered it and spoke. "The dress suits you." She went still. His eyes moved over her once, from the dark sweep of her hair to the burgundy line of the dress, then back to her face. It was the right color. Something went cold and then warm in her chest at the same time. She looked down at the fabric over her knees, then back at him. "You chose it." His eyes held hers. "Yes." No hesitation, no softening. The dress felt different on her now. Not just expensive, not just beautiful. It had been chosen, remembered. "You wore burgundy that night." His voice was quiet. "At the club. I remembered." Her lips parted. She felt heat move up the back of her neck and resented it immediately. Resented that he'd catalogued her, filed her away, known the color of what she was wearing before she'd even said a word to him. Out of everything that night, he had remembered a color. Her pulse was in her throat. The club. She held his gaze. Yes. She swallowed. You can't just buy things for me. His voice came even. The boots were one thing. The dress is something else. She looked at him. The car was moving, and the city was outside, and there was nowhere to go with any of this. She turned toward the dark window and found only her own reflection looking back. When she turned to him again, some of the edge had gone out of her voice. Why are you doing this? Pierce looked at her for a long moment. Because tonight mattered. She had no answer for that. Up front, Aiden sat perfectly still, eyes on the road ahead, as if whatever was happening in the back of the car had nothing to do with him. Kiara could feel the wine still moving warmly through her, the dress against her skin. Pierce's eyes on the side of her face, steady, the way they had been all night. She looked back at the window. I should go home. Her voice came out quieter than she'd intended, and she heard it. Pierce looked toward the front for a moment, then back. Aiden, the club. Aiden's voice came back without hesitation. Yes, boss? Kiara looked at Pierce. He was already watching her. You're not done celebrating. The Bentley pulled away from the curb before she could decide whether she was more irritated by the order or by the part of herself that didn't want to argue with it. She was watching him look at the window. That was what she told herself, that he was watching the city, the lights bleeding past in amber and dark, the wet Dublin streets going by. It took her longer than it should have to understand that he wasn't looking at the street at all. He was looking at the glass, at the reflection in it, at her. Her throat tightened. She turned back to her own window and stared at nothing. She could have said no. The word had been right there, one syllable, entirely available. And she'd let the car door close around her instead. Why? Maybe because he was the kind of man who decided things before other people had finished forming the question. Maybe because some part of her, the part she'd been very carefully not examining, hadn't wanted to go anywhere else at all. The car moved through the city. Neither of them spoke. The engine was the only thing that said anything. The club was called Vane. No sign on the door, just the name in small brass letters beside the handle, the kind that assumed you already knew. Aiden opened Pierce's door first, and Kiara was still sitting with her bag pressed against her stomach, no particular idea of what came next. Then her own door opened, and Pierce was there, one hand extended toward her, still, certain, like he had already decided how this part went. She looked at his hand, swallowed, and took it. He helped her out and didn't let go. She noticed this roughly 3 steps later, his fingers still around hers, easy, like it was nothing, and she looked down at his hand still holding hers with the expression of someone who had just stepped onto ice and hadn't decided yet whether to keep moving. The doors opened. The manager appeared with the practiced ease of a man whose job was exactly this. Mr. Gallagher, wonderful evening. Your table is ready. Pierce walked through without breaking stride. Kiara walked beside him because his hand was in hers, and she hadn't worked out how to stop it. The private section at the back was lower and quieter than the rest. Wide leather chairs, amber light, music that seemed to rise from the floor rather than come from anywhere specific. The conversations around them arrived in fragments she couldn't quite catch, names she didn't recognize, references that slid past her. The people here wore their money the way they wore their clothes, like they'd never once thought about it. Pierce gestured toward the seat beside his. She sat. He sat next to her. Close, his shoulder against hers, and she could feel the warmth of it and kept her eyes straight ahead. Why did you bring me here? He didn't answer immediately. He was watching the small stage at the far end where a woman in a dark dress was settling behind a microphone. To hear the music. He turned and looked at her, then quieter. And because I wanted people to see you. She faced him. Why would anyone want to see me? His hand came up, slow, deliberate, and lifted the strand of hair that had fallen across her cheek, setting it back with one finger. Her breath caught somewhere between her sternum and her throat. His eyes, pale and sharp and entirely focused, found hers and didn't move. Because I like you, Kiara Finley. Her lips parted. Her heart forgot what it was supposed to be doing. A voice came from just behind her. "Pierce, darling?" Sarah appeared at the edge of the table as though she'd always been heading there, a credit card held up between two fingers. She leaned down and kissed his cheek with the ease of someone who'd done it 100 times. "You left this with me. I thought I'd find you here eventually." Kiara was already looking sideways. Slim, dark-haired, effortlessly composed. Sarah looked at Kiara. Her eyes moved over the dress once, appraising, not unkind. Then she looked at Pierce with her brows slightly raised. "You were right about the burgundy." She looked back at Kiara with something warmer in her expression. "Gets it right once in a blue moon." And then she was gone, a small wave over her shoulder. Kiara stared at the space she'd left. His card. That woman had his card. She'd walked in here with his hand around hers, and a minute later a woman appeared, kissed his cheek, knew exactly where to find him, and looked at Kiara's dress like she already knew what it meant. Two men appeared at Pierce's shoulder. He rose to greet them, and Kiara was sitting alone with the music moving through her feet and those 4 words still somewhere in her chest she couldn't put down. "I like you, Kiara Finley," which meant what exactly? In this room, from this man, with that woman's eyes moving over her dress like a question she hadn't been asked yet. The chair beside her dipped. Colin dropped into it like he owned it. She went still. He was glancing at her sideways, glass in hand, not really looking yet. Then he did look, and he looked again. Her grip tightened around the bag in her lap. "Who are you?" His voice came easy, curious. He was leaning closer now, studying her face with the loose curiosity of someone past their 3rd drink and unconcerned about being caught at it. Then something shifted. "Hang on." He pulled back slightly, eyes narrowing. His gaze moved from her face to the dress and back. "Garden girl." He said it slowly, like he was still deciding. "That's not you." The back of her neck went warm. She said nothing. Pierce was already back in his seat. "Colin." His voice was level. "There are other tables." "This is the Gallagher table." Colin spread his hands, unbothered. He turned back to Kiara with a grin spreading across his face. "I honestly never noticed. You've been hiding, garden girl." His fingers moved toward her face. She caught his wrist before he made contact and set it aside without a word. Pierce was on his feet. "Don't touch her." The words came without heat, which made them worse. "Leave." Colin looked up at him, read whatever was in Pierce's face. He got to his feet with the hollow laugh of a man pretending he'd meant to stop anyway. "Relax. I'm just—" He looked between them, and something changed at the back of his eyes. "Does she even know why she's here?" Pierce stepped toward him. One hand closed around the front of Colin's collar. "Walk away." Colin held his gaze for one more second. Then he turned and walked. Kiara was already on her feet. She didn't look at Pierce, didn't look at the room. She walked, chin down, straight toward the entrance. His footsteps came up fast behind her, and then his hand was at her waist, firm and certain, turning her back. "Where are you going?" She pulled against his grip. "Away, just away." "Kiara," his voice dropped. "Come outside." He took her hand and walked her through the entrance and into the night. The rain had started while they were inside, not heavy, just steady, the Dublin kind that didn't ask permission. The pavement was already dark and wet, the streetlights catching it in long streaks. Kiara stopped on the step and felt it hit her face and her shoulders and the burgundy fabric of the dress. She turned on him. "Why did you bring me here?" She wasn't steady anymore, and she didn't care. "I don't belong in a room like that. You know that. You've always known that." She pressed a hand flat against his chest, not to reach him, just to hold her ground. "Colin sat down next to me and looked at me like I was something you'd picked up by mistake, asking me if I even know why I'm there." Her fingers tightened around the little bag in her hand. "Do I? Because I don't. I don't understand the dress or the boots or any of this, and I'm tired of standing there pretending I do." Her mouth trembled once with anger, and she hated that he saw it. "You said you wanted tonight to be special for me. This is what you chose." Pierce pulled his jacket off. He settled it around her shoulders without asking, without slowing. She pulled it off at once and pushed it back. "I don't want it." He looked at her steadily. "You're soaked." "I know." She kept her hand out until he took it. "I said I don't want it." He took the jacket back but didn't put it on. He just stood there, holding it, shirt already darkening at the shoulders, rain running off his hair. He didn't seem to notice any of it. "Nobody plays me, Mr. Gallagher." Her voice came out even at least. "Take me home. I'm not playing you. I told you. I like you. That's what this is." She shook her head, rain running into her eyes. "That's not what tonight felt like." "Colin is—" He stopped, made a short, clipped sound, and kept his temper better than she'd expected. "Colin is Colin. He doesn't speak for what's happening here. He never has." She looked at him. He looked back. The rain fell between them. The question had been sitting in her chest all night. She hadn't meant to ask it out loud. "Why me?" The words came out quieter than she'd meant, smaller than she wanted. "Why me? And not someone from that room? Someone who fits?" Pierce was quiet for a moment. "Because you're not like anyone I know." Something underneath his voice was different. Something she'd never heard before. Something that cost him. "You're smart. Your pride gets in your own way and you do it anyway. You never once say what you think I want to hear." He held her gaze. "And you've lived 30 meters from my front door for 3 years. And you've never asked me for a single thing." She could feel the rain in her hair now, the dress going cold against her skin. He stepped closer. They were the same height for a moment, the step doing what time hadn't. That specific blue, pale and sharp, the one she'd been not looking at for months, right there. "You're the only person on that estate who speaks to me like I'm a man and not Pierce Gallagher." His voice was even. "That's why." She held his gaze. "Easier to control, then." Her chin lifted. "Is that what I am? Safe? Manageable?" He looked at her for a moment. "Have you met yourself?" It caught her off guard badly enough that the beginning of a laugh nearly escaped before she stopped it. "You're impossible." She looked at him then, the way she'd been careful not to all evening. His eyes were entirely focused on her face, and for one unguarded second she didn't look away. "And I know," his voice dropped slightly, "that you walked out of that hall tonight and came to my car anyway." That one hit. She felt it under her ribs. Because she had. Because part of her had been halfway to his car before she'd admitted it. She had nothing to say to that. She looked away toward the street. When she turned back, her voice had dropped. "Why was I at that table tonight?" Pierce's attention didn't leave her face. "Because I wanted you beside me." Nothing in him shifted after he said it. No apology, no retreat. She met his eyes through the rain. "That's not enough." His eyes stayed on hers. "It is for me." Her teeth pressed together. "Well, it isn't for me." "Kiara Finley." The words came completely level. "You're going to marry me." Her own name landed differently in his mouth than it ever had before. She caught that somewhere, before the rest of it hit. Something went still inside her entirely. She could feel her own pulse, in her throat, in her fingertips, in the hand still holding the little bag. What?" The words came out barely above a breath. He didn't flinch. "You heard me. You're my fiancé, as of tonight." She stared at him. Her hands had gone still at her sides. The rain kept going, the city kept going around them. Nothing else did. She shook her head slowly. "You can't just decide that." He stepped back and held the car door open. Aidan was already there. "I already have. Get in. Tell me where you want to go." She got in because her legs were wet and the rain was still coming and she had nowhere else to go. Pierce got in after her. Without a word, he settled his jacket back around her shoulders. She didn't stop him. The door closed. The city moved past the glass. She sat with his words sitting somewhere she couldn't get to. His eyes were on her. "Where do you want to go?" She looked at the dark outside, the one place that actually felt like hers. The greenhouse. Pierce turned that over for a second. The greenhouse. She straightened slightly. "You said it mattered. What I wanted. And I can't seem to get away from you tonight, so—" The greenhouse. Something shifted at the corner of his mouth. He turned toward the front and pressed the button. The privacy glass slid up. Aiden. She heard the quiet sound that might have been Aiden suppressing something. The car moved. Pierce didn't follow her in. He stopped at the door. 5 minutes. Wait for me. She turned. And if I don't? His voice didn't change. Then I walk to the cottage and knock on your father's door. Her hands had gone cold. She had nothing left to throw at that. She went inside. The greenhouse was warm and dark and smelled exactly like it always had. Earth and moisture and the faint sweetness of the white camellias along the south bench. She dropped into the chair by the potting table, still in his jacket, her cheeks burning in a way that had nothing to do with the cold. She was pressing her face into the collar, breathing in slowly before she'd decided to do it. She made herself stop. He was dangerous. She had known that since the night she'd watched him raise a gun in a room she should never have been in. He had just told her she was going to marry him, like it was already settled. No question, no apology. The car door open before she'd finished processing the words. She pulled back from the jacket and looked at it in her lap. She put it back on. The door opened 5 minutes later, and Pierce came through it with a folded blanket under one arm, 2 glasses in one hand, and a bottle in the other. Kiara stared. He crossed the greenhouse, set the glasses on the bench, draped the blanket over the back of the chair. He sat down beside her, close, shoulder against hers, and leaned in. Now we talk. His voice was low, close enough that she felt it more than heard it. Pierce poured without asking. Steady hand, no hurry. The bottle tilted like it was second nature. He held the glass toward her. Kiara took it. She was looking at the wine, not at him. The glass was cool against her fingers, and the greenhouse was warm, and the white camellias along the south bench were perfectly still in the dark, and her pulse was doing things she'd rather not think about. She'd heard enough tonight. She wasn't sure she had room for more. Pierce settled back beside her, his own glass raised, his eyes on her over the rim. What are we talking about? Her voice came out steadier than she felt. Not a question, really. More like something to say before he could say something worse. The corner of his mouth shifted. Our wedding date. She laughed, short, surprised out of her, and pulled back slightly to look at him properly. That joke is a little beneath you, Mr. Gallagher. Whatever your age is, which I genuinely don't know. Pierce looked at her, the corner of his mouth doing something she couldn't quite read. Do you know who you're talking to, Kiara? He took a slow drink. I'm 34, by the way. I couldn't tell if you thinking I was older was meant as a compliment. She shook her head. I don't know you. That's the point. She turned the glass in her hands. Let's say you're serious. Let's say any of this is real. You would actually marry a woman you don't know. His eyes didn't leave his glass. What makes you think I don't know you? It wasn't a question. He lifted his glass and took a slow drink, then leaned back into the chair like he had nowhere else to be. His gaze drifted away from her, down the length of the greenhouse. Then he raised one hand and pointed, the foxgloves along the south wall, tall, purple, perfectly quiet. Those are your favorites. His voice had shifted, easier now, almost offhand. Not the camellias, not the roses, those. He looked at her then, just briefly. Beautiful and difficult to handle. He looked back at the foxgloves. She went still, not because of the flowers, but because of what came with them. You water the camellias before school most mornings because you feel like they're yours to look after, but you water the foxgloves because you want to. He glanced at her sideways, brief, unhurried, and kept going, that faint smile still at the edge of his mouth. You quit your part-time job to help your father on weekends, his back. You haven't told him you know. You just started showing up. The glass in Kiara's hand had gone very heavy. Her lips had parted. She was listening the way you listen when someone is saying something they shouldn't be able to say. Still, careful, not wanting to move in case it stopped. You lost your mother when you were 13. His voice didn't soften or harden. It stayed even, which was somehow worse. Your grades dropped badly that year. You missed enough school that they held you back, and you changed schools because you couldn't stand that anyone knew. The glass almost slipped. She caught it. Her fingers had gone cold around the stem, and the greenhouse was very warm, and those two things didn't make sense together. How? Her voice came out smaller than she meant it to, and she hated that she could hear it happening and couldn't stop it. How do you know that? He set his glass down and turned toward her fully, closing the distance in a way she hadn't tracked. You want me to keep going? She should have said no. She looked at him and said nothing, which was its own kind of answer. You're guarded when you first meet someone, watchful. You take the measure of a room before you decide to be in it. His eyes moved over her face, like he already knew what he'd find. But when you think something is wrong, when you think someone is being treated badly, you stop measuring, and you say exactly what you think. I've seen it happen. Her throat closed around whatever she'd been about to say. And your first year on the estate, you used to sit on the stones by the pond on the east side. You looked different then, fuller in the face, younger. He paused, just briefly. The 3 years did the rest. He glanced at her sideways. You had old headphones, the big kind, over the ear, and you'd stay there for an hour sometimes. His mouth curved slightly. I could never work out what you were listening to. The silence sat between them. She shouldn't answer that. She knew she shouldn't answer that. Placebo. Her voice came out barely above a breath. And sometimes the cure. His face changed, warm and brief, the first genuinely unguarded thing she'd seen from him all night. Nostalgic girl. It was such a small thing. 2 words. She felt them land somewhere she hadn't been expecting. Then he leaned toward her, close enough now that she could smell him. That warm amber depth she hadn't been able to name the first time and still couldn't, the same thing she'd been carrying in the jacket all evening without admitting it, and something shifted between them that she couldn't name. Shall I keep going? She couldn't get her voice to work right. How do you know all of that? I thought you never... She stopped, steadied herself. I thought you never saw me. He raised his brows slightly. I see everything. I just don't always show that I'm looking. He was watching her steadily. But you... I made a point of watching you. She could feel her own heartbeat now, somewhere in her throat. Why? He was too close now, his voice dropped. Because you were the most genuine thing I'd seen in a very long time. Kiara breathed out. She didn't mean to. The breath left her before she could catch it, and she shifted back without meaning to, and the wine glass tilted in her hand, and the wine went. Cold and burgundy across the front of her dress, down over the fabric, onto her chest. Oh, she looked down. Oh God, the dress. Pierce took the glass from her hand. Calm. No rush. He set it on the bench without looking at it and reached toward her, and his fingers, slow, entirely certain, moved across her chest, her skin, collecting the wine where it had gone. Then he brought his fingers to his lips and held her gaze as he did it. Kiara didn't move. She couldn't. Her lips had parted on their own. She was watching his mouth, and her breathing had stopped making sense. And the greenhouse was very small, and the foxgloves were still there in the dark behind him, quiet and poisonous and perfect. And she understood suddenly why people made bad decisions in rooms like this. He reached up and tucked the strand of hair that had fallen across her cheek back with one finger. The touch lasted less than a second. She felt it for much longer. Pierce's eyes moved from his own hand to her face, to her mouth. He leaned in, slowly, unhurried, like the answer was already his. For a moment he didn't move any closer. He was close enough that she could feel the warmth coming off him, close enough that his breath reached her mouth before his lips did. She could feel it. That specific warmth, that specific stillness, and she didn't move either. She thought he might stop. She wasn't sure which outcome she was hoping for. His mouth touched hers, just barely. The softest possible contact, less than a kiss, more than nothing. And Kiara's eyes closed, and everything went quiet. She could taste the wine on his mouth, and underneath it something else, something that was just him. The same warmth she'd been trying not to breathe in all evening, closer now than it had any right to be. Her hands came up before she knew they were moving. She pushed, not hard, barely anything. And the moment she felt him pull back, something broke open in her chest, some wall she hadn't known she'd been building all night. And she was already on her feet, already moving, her body making the decision because her mind couldn't be trusted with it. She was out of the greenhouse door and into the dark and running, heels on the gravel, cold air on her face, and she kept her eyes forward, kept moving, didn't slow down until the cottage door was in front of her and she fell against it, her back to the wood, her hand pressed hard over her mouth. She could hear herself breathing. Pierce Gallagher had kissed her. Pierce Gallagher had kissed her, and she had closed her eyes. She pressed her hand harder against her mouth and slid down until she was sitting on the cold ground, with her back against the door, and her knees pulled up, and the burgundy dress ruined, and her heart going faster than she knew what to do with. She pressed her hand to her chest and looked up at the dark. "Oh, no," she thought. "Please, don't let me fall in love with him." The morning after was a June morning. The kind Ireland didn't hand out often enough to take for granted. Clear sky, real warmth in it already. Light coming across the grounds in long gold lines that hadn't asked permission. Pierce was in the kitchen with a glass of orange juice, standing at the window, looking out at the grounds. He kept seeing it. Chiara bolting out of that greenhouse door, heels on the gravel, not once looking back. He felt the smile before he could stop it. He was still holding it when he heard the kitchen door. Moira came in with the particular composure of someone who had decided on her approach before she'd reached the door. "Pierce, darling." She moved toward him, her voice warm in the careful way she deployed warmth. "I was hoping to find you." He turned from the window. "Morning." She settled at the kitchen island, hands folded. "Your father's pressure on all of this. It's exhausting me, if I'm honest." She was looking at him steadily. "You stepped in to protect Colin. I understand that. You're the one keeping this family together, after your father. You're a serious man, a measured one." She paused. "But Pierce, marrying that girl to make your father happy. I can't accept that. I won't." Pierce set his glass down. "Do you know me at all?" he said. "If you think I'd do anything to make someone else happy." Moira blinked. It was the only thing that moved in her face. "Then why?" He took a slow drink. "Because I like her." Something shifted behind her eyes. A small, careful reset. He watched her find her footing again. "Pierce." She came toward him, voice dropping. "Whatever her origins, and I have nothing against Peter Finlay, he has been loyal to this family. She is not one of us. A gardener's daughter, she'd drag you down. All of us." Her voice stayed even, almost gentle. "And on paper, Pierce, that girl is already dead." She let that sit. "The only thing we lose if we walk away from this quietly is the shares staying locked, and we don't need that money." Pierce turned and looked at his mother. "When are you going to stop looking down on people, Moira Gallagher?" Her chin lifted. "I'm protecting this family." "You're protecting the image of this family." He pushed back from the counter. "Chiara is smart. She's unlike anyone I know, and I chose her. Not for father, not for the shares, not for Colin." He held her gaze one more second. "You'd better get used to it." He walked out. The kitchen was quiet behind him. Outside, the morning was exactly what it had promised through the window. Warm, clean, the grounds washed green from the night's rain, the gravel already drying at the edges of the path. Pierce came down the steps and looked around. The cottage, the gardens, the greenhouse. The curtains at the cottage were still drawn. He stood there for a moment with his hands in his pockets, looking at that window, thinking about her. Chiara Finlay had run from him last night. He had no particular intention of letting that stand. She'd left before her father was up. That was the point. Peter always said the same thing when it came to the Gallaghers. "Stay in your lane, Chiara. Don't get close. Don't give them reason to look your way." And if he'd seen her face this morning, he would have known something had gone wrong. So she'd taken her bicycle from the side of the cottage and slipped out while the house was still dark, and now she was on the tree-lined road outside the estate gates with every intention of getting her head straight. The June morning had looked better from the cottage doorway. Out here it was cold, the early air cutting through her cardigan at the shoulders and creeping up under her dress to her bare legs, the dew still on the grass along the verge, but she barely felt it. Somewhere underneath the chill, Pierce Gallagher's mouth was still on hers, and that particular sensation had no interest in fading. She looked down at the hunter boots on her feet, his boots, the ones that had appeared outside her door, and felt a wave of something she didn't want to name. Her old ones had worn through the sole. She'd had no choice. You have no dignity, Kiara Finley, she thought, none at all, although it was getting harder to feel bad about them. She stood on the pedals, picking up speed along the empty road, and said it out loud because there was no one to hear. "Get out of my head," she exhaled. "Get out." She didn't hear the jeep until it was already close. She registered it the way you register something you've been dreading. A cold drop of certainty that arrived before her brain had time to form the thought. She glanced back. Black jeep, moving at a pace that wasn't overtaking. Oh God. Her grip tightened on the handlebars. Not now. I can't look at him right now. She wasn't thinking when she turned the wheel. The road was lined with open field on her right, long summer grass, yellow-green, the ground uneven and soft, and she swung the handlebars hard and left the tarmac, grass whipping at her legs the moment the bicycle hit the uneven ground. She could feel the stalks cutting across her calves, but it didn't matter because the jeep was behind her, a four-wheel drive, and she'd made a catastrophic decision. But her body had committed before her brain caught up. She looked back over her shoulder. The jeep had followed her in. The panic arrived like a fist. She turned back too fast, and the front wheel caught a stone buried in the grass. She felt the jolt, the sudden wrongness of the angle, and then she was airborne, and then she wasn't. She hit the ground on her elbow and knee. For a moment she just lay there, cheek against the grass, smelling earth, everything gone quiet around her. Everything throbbed. Her elbow, her knee, her pride, which had taken the worst of it. She pushed herself up slowly and felt her elbow sting, sharply, and looked down to find it bleeding, the skin scraped raw. Her knee was the same. Somewhere behind her the bicycle had come to rest on its side in the grass. The shadow fell across her before she heard him move. "Kiara?" His voice came from directly above. "Were you running from me?" She turned her head. Pierce was standing over her in a white shirt and cargo trousers, sunglasses pushed up into his hair, looking down at her with an expression she couldn't fully read from this angle. The morning light was behind him. He looked, infuriatingly, impossibly, like someone who had never once fallen off a bicycle in his life. She looked back at the grass. He crouched beside her, without being asked, and took her arm, and she let him pull her upright because her knee was already stiffening and her dignity was already gone, and there was no version of this where she came out ahead. "Oh, Kiara." His voice had dropped. He lifted a hand and brushed the dirt from her cheek with his thumb, slow, unhurried. And when his eyes found hers, something tightened low in her chest, like she was something worth looking at, like she was the only thing worth looking at. How does he do that? She thought wildly. How does he look at me like that? She managed to breathe. That was all. Her elbow and her knee were somewhere in the background, registering pain she couldn't quite bring herself to pay attention to. Then Pierce slid one arm under her knees and the other around her back and lifted her off the ground entirely. She didn't say anything. She wasn't sure she was capable of it. He carried her to the jeep, and as he reached for the door, his eyes dropped briefly to her feet. The hunter boots, the ones she'd told herself she'd had no choice about. And something moved at the corner of his mouth. He said nothing, just settled her into the passenger seat and shut the door. "I'll have someone collect the bicycle later." He got in beside her and reached for the glove compartment, pulling out an antiseptic spray. She sat still while he leaned over her knee because there was nothing else to do, and watched his hands, careful, certain, completely at ease, work across the graze. The spray stung, and her body flinched before she could stop it, and without looking up he leaned forward and blew across the wound, light and deliberate. Something ran the length of her spine. She stared at the top of his head. Those are the same hands, she thought, the ones that held a gun in that room, the ones that closed around Colin's collar like it was nothing, and now. She held still while he moved to her elbow. The silence between them was sitting heavy, Her skin, where he'd touched, felt different from the rest of her. More awake, more present, like her body had filed it separately and wasn't done with it. When he finished, his gaze was traveling slowly. Her chest, rising and falling faster than she wanted it to, then her mouth, then her eyes. He held there. Then he gave a small, quiet shake of his head, like she'd confirmed something he'd been working out for a while. "You're something wild, Kiara." His voice was low. "Aren't you?" He leaned forward slightly, his forearm resting on his knee. "Not because you run from me." And here his eyes stayed steady on hers, unhurried, the way he did everything. "Because you run straight into the things that scare you most, and you still come back, burning." The words sat between them. Something pulled tight in her chest and didn't let go. He was close, close enough that she could feel the warmth coming off him, close enough that the space between them felt like a decision she hadn't made yet. Her hands were in her lap. She was aware of them in a way she usually wasn't. She didn't decide to kiss him. Her hands were already on his jaw, and her mouth was already on his before she understood what she'd done. Urgent and fast, and nothing like the soft, careful thing he'd done in the greenhouse. This was different. This was her, unguarded, moving on pure instinct, before thought could intervene. He didn't hesitate. His hands found her waist, and he pulled her forward, and she went, onto his lap, the seat shifting under them, and the kiss deepened into something she couldn't name or hold on to. Every place he touched burned through the fabric. She wanted more, and couldn't understand why, and couldn't make herself stop. They broke apart, breathless. His hands were still at her waist. Her hands were still at his jaw. Neither of them moved for a moment that stretched longer than it should have. She could feel her own heartbeat in her throat. Her lips were still warm. She was trying to locate a single thought and coming up empty. Then Pierce lifted both hands and framed her face, palms against her cheeks, thumbs at the line of her jaw, and looked at her with something she didn't have a name for. "I told you, Kiara Finley." His voice was completely steady. "You're going to be my wife. You can't run from that." The corner of his mouth lifted. "Not on a bicycle, not on foot." His eyes moved over her face. "And now we both know you want this as much as I do." The words landed. She pulled back, swung her leg over, and dropped back into her own seat in one movement, and sat there with her hands in her lap, and her heart doing something completely unreasonable. "I lost control," she thought. "I actually lost control." "That was just attraction." She heard how steady her voice came out, and hated it. "You know how it works. Man, woman, proximity, hormones." She kept her eyes forward. "It doesn't mean I agreed to anything." Pierce was quiet for a moment. Her pulse, unhelpfully, was still going. "So you're telling me," his voice was easy, the amusement sitting just underneath it, "that you just used me for your satisfaction, huh?" She turned, opened her mouth, closed it. Her cheeks were burning. He was already looking forward, one hand on the wheel. "I'm coming to speak to your father tomorrow evening." His voice was unhurried, like he was noting an appointment. "Whether you want it or not, you're mine now." He started the engine. Kiara turned to the window. Her jaw was tight. Her hands were folded in her lap with more deliberateness than they needed. The corner of her mouth kept doing something. She kept stopping. She didn't look at him once. She could feel his attention on her the entire way home, steady and certain, like everything else about him. They passed through the manor gates and kept going. Kiara watched the estate wall slide past her window, then the hedgerows, then the open road. "Where are we going?" Pierce had one hand on the wheel and his eyes on the road, and the particular stillness about him that meant he was enjoying something. "It's Sunday." His eyes stayed on the road. "I want to spend the day with my fiancé." Something landed low in her chest when he said that word. She turned to look at him. "We're not engaged. An engagement is a formal agreement between families, Mr. Gallagher, not a man deciding something at midnight and expecting the other person to catch up." He glanced at her sideways, just once. "My name is Pierce." His voice was even, almost pleasant. "You kissed me about 20 minutes ago, quite passionately, as I recall." His eyes went back to the road. "And you're still calling me Mr. Gallagher." The problem was that the smile arrived before she could stop it. She turned back to the window and pressed her lips together and stared at the hedgerows. Pierce laughed. Actual, unguarded, teeth showing, and the sound of it did something inconvenient to the space between her ribs. "Kiara Finley," he said, still smiling, "I represent the Gallagher family, which means when you say families, you mean me and your father, and that conversation is already scheduled." He let that sit for exactly 1 second. "Now, I want to spend today with you. Are we clear on that?" She said nothing, which he took as agreement. The equestrian club sat behind low stone walls and old iron gates, the kind of place that didn't advertise, because the people who came here already knew where it was. A groom held the gate, and another appeared to take the jeep before Pierce had fully stepped out. Every person who passed said, "Mr. Gallagher," in the tone of people who had been saying it for years. Kiara walked beside him and said nothing, and tried to look like she belonged here, which was an old exercise, and not a comfortable one. Aidan materialized from the direction of the stables, jacket straight, face giving nothing away as usual. "Boss!" He fell into step beside Pierce. "Horses are ready. Private tables set for lunch." His gaze moved briefly to Kiara. "Miss Finley." She smiled at him. He returned it with the short, efficient nod of a man who found smiling non-essential. "However," Aidan kept his voice level, "the Walshes are here. George Walsh." Pierce's face shifted. Not much, just enough that she noticed. His jaw settled into something harder than it had been a moment ago. He looked at Kiara, then back at Aidan. "We won't be eating here. Cancel the table." Aidan turned and walked back the way he'd come. Kiara said nothing. But the thought arrived before she could stop it. Quiet, quick, gone, almost before it formed. "Is it me? Is he moving us because of me?" She didn't ask. She kept her face still and followed him toward the stables, and the thought dissolved before she could hold on to it. She told herself it was nothing. She told herself it again. The mare was chestnut, well-built, with the self-possession good horses carry. She turned her head when they approached and regarded Kiara with large, unhurried eyes. Kiara reached out her hand, slowly, carefully, the way you do with something that hasn't decided about you yet. "What's her name?" "Ember." Pierce was standing at the horse's flank, completely at ease, watching Kiara the way he watched everything that interested him. "Ember. Looks quiet. Burns anyway." She felt that one more than she meant to. She kept her eyes on the horse. The smile came anyway, small and reluctant, and she pressed it back down before it could do anything. Pierce saw it. He smiled back at her, slow, certain, and turned toward the stable door. "Come on, let's take her out." Kiara looked down at her dress and cardigan and the hunter boots. "Shouldn't we have, I don't know, proper riding clothes? We can wear whatever we like, Miss Finley." And before she'd finished processing that, he had his foot in the stirrup and was up, settling onto Ember's back with the ease of someone who had done this since before he was a convincing argument for anything. He looked down at her from up there and extended one hand. "Come up." She reached up. His grip closed around her wrist. Firm, certain, and pulled, and she was suddenly airborne. And then she was behind him, both legs on one side of the horse, one hand grabbing at his shoulder to keep from sliding. "Hold on." There was something at the edge of it, something that sounded like amusement wearing a straight face. "Properly." She hesitated for exactly 1 second. Then she put both arms around his waist and pressed herself against his back and felt the warmth of him through the shirt and tried very hard to think about something else. The place on her wrist where he'd gripped it was still warm. Ember moved forward, slow and steady, carrying them both out into the pale June light. Kiara kept her arms where they were. His back was warm against her chest, his shirt thin enough that she could feel him breathing. The scent she'd been cataloguing without meaning to, that warm, amber depth, was right there, unavoidable. She kept her chin slightly lowered and tried to understand how any of this had happened, how she had gone from a gardener's daughter on a bicycle at 6 in the morning to this particular morning, this particular man, the whole impossible situation moving forward at a walking pace while she tried to remember who she'd been before any of it started. She wasn't sure she could. Ember found her own pace going uphill, slower, more deliberate, picking her way through the longer grass where the path thinned. The estate fell away behind them. The air changed, cooler and cleaner, the kind that had you breathing differently without deciding to. At the top, the mare stopped. Pierce dismounted first, easy and unhurried, and turned back to Chiara. His hands found her waist, and he lifted her down. Slowly, taking his time. And for a moment, he didn't step back. He was still holding her, her feet on the ground, their faces close. And the air between them carried something neither of them was ready to name. Then he let go. The view opened in all directions. Below them, the town, and beyond it, just visible through the morning haze, the smudge of Dublin on the horizon. Chiara let out a breath. This is extraordinary. She closed her eyes without quite meaning to. The wind moved her hair across her face, and she didn't fix it. When she opened her eyes again, she turned to Pierce. "Do you bring all your girlfriends up here?" He was watching her with that unhurried attention of his. "Actually," his voice was even, "you're the first." She looked at him for a moment that went a little long. "What about last night?" She kept it casual, eyes on the horizon. "The tall one, the one you left your credit card with." Pierce's mouth moved, something he was working not to show. "Were you jealous, Chiara?" "No." Flat, immediate. "I just didn't know who she was. You were very close." "My cousin." His voice was easy now. "Sarah. We grew up together. More like siblings." Chiara looked back at the view. Something was happening at the corner of her mouth, and she let her hair fall forward so he couldn't see it properly. They sat at the edge of the ridge, the ground dropping away in front of them, the whole county spread out below. Not quite a cliff. Close enough? Chiara pulled her cardigan tighter. "Do you always make every decision yourself? About everything?" Pierce was quiet for a moment. "When I was younger," he said, "I thought if I decided first, nothing could get to me." He had his forearms on his knees, looking out at the distance. "I'm a Gallagher, Chiara, our family. What we run, what we manage, it doesn't operate the way most things do. In that world, being certain isn't arrogance. That's what holds things together." She was listening to the grass move in the wind. "I saw you shoot that man." It came out quieter than she'd intended. "After that you were so calm. That frightened me." He turned to look at her. "I did what needed to be done." There was nothing soft in it. "If I go unsteady in those moments, everything I'm responsible for falls apart. That's not coldness, that's the job." She looked down at the grass between them. "Are you afraid of me?" His voice dropped. She thought about it honestly, which she hadn't expected to do. "No." She let the words sit. "But I think not being afraid of you might be the wrong instinct." He reached over and touched her hair, just once, pushing it back from her face, and left his hand there against her cheek. She felt the warmth of his palm before she'd registered he was moving. She didn't pull away, she wasn't sure she could have. "I will never hurt you." The words came quiet, without emphasis, which made them heavier than if he'd tried. "And I won't let anyone else." Something loosened in her chest, a tension she hadn't known she was holding. She turned her face toward him. He drew her closer and pressed his lips to hers. Soft, brief, nothing like the urgency of before. Just a fact, just something he wanted her to know. When he pulled back, she didn't move away. She turned and leaned her head against his chest and felt how solid he was under her cheek, his arm coming around her, his hand finding the back of her head. He held her there. She could hear his heartbeat. She thought about how strange it was to feel safe in a place like this, at the edge of a ridge, in the arms of a man who decided things and let the world follow, and how she hadn't expected to feel it, and how she did anyway. The coffee cup hit the floor. Not the whole thing. Just tipped, just enough to slosh onto Sadie's rug, and Sadie didn't even look at it. She was staring at Chiara with her mouth open and both hands in the air. Chiara was sitting cross-legged on the bed with her palms turned up, her expression somewhere between guilty and completely lost. "It just happened. I didn't plan it, Sadie. I didn't even see it coming." "I did." Sadie pointed at her. "I told you. I told you from the way he looked at you that night." She stopped, pressed both hands to her face, then dropped them. "Okay, back up. His father's coming to talk to your father. What does that even... How quickly did this..." She shook her head hard. "Chiara, You just graduated, you have things you want to do, plans, and he is a Gallagher." Her voice had gone very level. "You understand what that means, right? Like, are you actually considering becoming a Mafia wife?" Chiara stood up. "Okay, I'm going to go." "You are not going anywhere." Sadie's hand closed around her arm and hauled her back down. "Sit. You are the most rational person I know. If you came to me with this, I'd tell you you'd lost your mind, which I'm technically telling you now, but you don't do this. You don't fall for anyone in 5 minutes." She looked at her. "Are you okay?" Chiara looked at her hands. "I'm fine." Sadie's eyes narrowed. "You fell for him in 4 days." "I didn't." Chiara pulled her knees up. "That's the thing. It wasn't 4 days." She was quiet for a second, working out how to say it. "From the first time I saw him, properly saw him, not just across the grounds, he made me nervous in a way I didn't understand. I kept telling myself it was just proximity or tension or the situation. But I started going out to the garden more, and my eyes kept looking for him. And then that night at the club, when he knew exactly who I was, when he just—" She stopped. "I think I was already gone by then. I just didn't have the language for it yet." Sadie brought her palm down on her own forehead. "Oh my God." Chiara looked at her lap. "I know. No, I mean, oh my God, that's actually—" She exhaled. "Okay, but also you kissed him." Chiara pressed her lips together. "He kissed me first," she said eventually. "And then I kissed him back, several times. Not always because he started it." Sadie covered her mouth with both hands. Her eyes were wide. "How far did—" "Not that far." Chiara pointed at her. "Don't. I'm not doing anything. I'm just—" Sadie dropped her hands. "I mean, have you seen him? Like actually looked at him?" She shuddered slightly. "Not that I blame you." "He said things, Sadie." Chiara's voice dropped. "The way he looked at me, he knew things about me that nobody picks up on. He noticed." She shook her head slowly. "It's complicated. His family is what it is, and I know what I'm walking into. But if I said no, if I pushed him away—" She went quiet. Sadie watched her. Chiara exhaled. "I don't want him to stop." The room went still. Sadie sat down next to her on the bed, close enough that their shoulders touched. "Does his family know?" Chiara shrugged one shoulder. "Everyone just goes along with whatever he decides." Sadie crossed her arms. "Falling in line doesn't mean they won't make your life hell. That's not the same thing." Chiara breathed in slowly. Her hands came up, and she pressed them over her face and held them there. "I love him." The words came out muffled into her palms, and she heard them, heard how certain she sounded, and it surprised her more than it should have. She dropped her hands and looked at Sadie. "I love him. But I will never let anyone walk over me, not even him." Chiara stood at the door for a moment before she opened it. Pierce had said he'd come while she was at Sadie's, that he'd speak to her father then, so she wouldn't have to be there for it. She'd been glad at the time. Now, with her hand on the latch, she wasn't sure glad was the right word. She opened the door. Peter Finlay was in the armchair by the window, the one he always sat in when he had something on his mind. He wasn't reading. He wasn't doing anything. Just sitting, looking out at the grey afternoon, and the cottage was very quiet. "Dad." She stayed in the doorway, her hand still on the frame. He turned and looked at her. "Come here, love." She crossed the room and sat down across from him, the way she had as a child when she'd done something wrong and known it. He was quiet for a moment, his hands resting on his knees. "Do you love him?" Chiara nodded. Peter looked at the window. The silence stretched, the kind that comes before hard things. "I want to tell you," he said at last, "that marrying Pierce Gallagher puts you in danger. That's a fact, and I won't dress it up." He stopped. His jaw moved once. "The rest of it, the feelings, what's between you, I can't speak to that. I wouldn't." He looked at her then, and his eyes were wet. "But I need you to know what you're walking into." The tightness arrived in her throat before anything else did. He stood up. Come here. She was on her feet before she'd decided to be, and when his arms came around her, she pressed her face against his shoulder and held on. He was solid and warm and smelled of the garden and the same coat he'd worn for years, and she could feel him breathing. "You're my daughter." His voice was rough. "I'd give my life for you without thinking twice. The one thing I can't stand between you and is this." She pulled back just enough to look at him. "Don't worry about me, Dad. I can take care of myself." His hand moved once across her hair, but his eyes had gone somewhere she couldn't follow, and she didn't yet know what he'd left out. They were standing outside Crispin Gallagher's study, waiting for the door to open, and Pierce had her hand in his. "You know Colin doesn't matter," he said quietly, "and my mother will adjust. The only one who matters in that room is me." Chiara looked at the door. "Doesn't it feel like things are moving fast? 2 weeks, Pierce. I don't understand why 2 weeks." He turned to look at her. "Because I want you, Chiara Finley." No flourish, no softening, just the fact of it, certain, quiet, done. Before she could answer, the door opened. The room arranged itself in front of her like something she'd been rehearsing for without knowing it. Crispin Gallagher was behind the desk, hands folded, the particular stillness of a man who had spent decades deciding things without raising his voice. Moira stood at his shoulder, composed, watchful, her expression set at neutral, which Chiara had already learned to read as a warning, and Colin was draped across an armchair like he'd been decorating it all morning, one leg over the arm, eyes already moving to Chiara the moment she came through the door. She didn't look at him. They crossed the room. Crispin rose. "Chiara." He came around the desk and took both her hands, and his warmth was so deliberate that she felt the edges of it. "Welcome, I mean that," she smiled. "Thank you, Mr. Gallagher." "Crispin?" He held her gaze for a moment, the gaze of a man sizing her up as warmly as he knew how. Then he stepped back. "Pierce told us you love each other. In this family that has always been sufficient. The wedding, whatever you want, it will be done." From the armchair, Colin made a sound that was almost a laugh. Crispin's eyes didn't move from Chiara's face. Chiara kept her voice even. "I'd like something small. I've told Pierce I don't want a production." Moira moved. Not much. Just her weight shifting, her hands coming together in front of her. "Chiara." Her voice had that warmth that was the lead-in to something she wouldn't like. "Our circle is considerable. 300 guests would be a conservative number. You might want to keep that in mind." Pierce turned and looked at his mother. The look was brief, and it was enough. "Everything will be exactly as Chiara wants." Chiara lifted her chin slightly. "A smaller wedding, Mrs. Gallagher." She turned to Crispin. "And I intend to work. I'll be submitting applications in Dublin this week. After the wedding, I'll be practicing there." "Of course." Crispin tipped his head. "We have a house in Dublin. Pierce mentioned you'd be based there." "We will," Crispin smiled. "Then I think we're ready for the part that seals it." He looked at Pierce. "The ring?" Pierce reached into his jacket and produced a small velvet box. Chiara hadn't known about this part. She stared at the box, then at Pierce, and he was already opening it, a diamond set in something clean and serious, the kind that didn't ask for attention. He looked at her with that same certainty he always carried. "Give me your hand." She hesitated. The room was very quiet. "Actually," her voice came out steadier than she'd expected, "if this is a family moment, a tradition, then I'd like my father to be here." The silence that came after wasn't comfortable. She looked at Pierce. His face had shifted into something that wasn't irritation, something quieter, which she found harder to read. "Of course." He turned and spoke quietly to the attendant at the door. 7 minutes passed. The room stayed mostly silent. Chiara kept her hands in her lap, and the tension settled over it like weather. She leaned close to him and kept her voice low. "I think this should have been more private. Just us." "I understand." He didn't look away from the middle distance. "It's a family tradition." The door opened. Peter Finley came in wearing his good jacket. She recognized it immediately, had ironed it herself once, and his face was working very hard at neutral. Crispin rose again. "Peter, come in. The children are marking the occasion. You should be here, your family now." Peter's jaw moved. He nodded once and stood beside Chiara, and she felt his hand briefly at the small of her back, there and gone, which was all he could give her in this room, and she took it for what it was. Pierce extended his hand. She gave him hers. The ring slid onto her finger, cool, exact, heavier than she'd expected. Crispin kissed her cheek, then Moira. A brief, dry press of lips that left something cold on her skin even after she'd stepped back. Colin unfolded himself from the armchair. "Welcome to the family." He spread his arms, and his smile was too wide and too easy. "Garden girl." He kissed her cheek and held it a second too long. Her jaw went tight. She kept her eyes forward, and her hands still, and her face exactly where it was. When he finally started to pull back, she turned her head, just slightly, just enough, and put her mouth close to his ear. "Don't ever touch me again." Just the words, close enough that only he could hear them. Colin's eyes moved. Pierce first, something tightening in his expression, then back to Kiara as he stepped away. For 1 second, they were looking straight at each other. She held his gaze and mouthed it. Never. He stepped back. Kiara turned toward the door. She wanted to be out of this room. She wanted it immediately and didn't entirely understand why. The ring was on her finger, and the room was full of people who were technically celebrating, and something was wrong in a way she couldn't locate or name, and it sat just beneath her sternum like something waiting. Pierce was in Dublin for business, 3 days, then 4, then a 5th. In his absence, the estate kept moving, and Kiara kept moving inside it, careful, contained, keeping to herself. The guest room he'd arranged for her sat empty. She'd thanked him and gone back to the cottage. Her father was there. She wasn't leaving Peter alone in that house with a Gallagher wedding a week out. Crispin she could manage. Brief exchanges when their paths crossed, easy enough. She was grateful, though she kept that to herself. Moira she avoided. Colin she avoided more carefully. The job applications she'd sent out herself from her laptop at the cottage table, not asking Pierce for introductions or contacts or anything that would put his name on it instead of hers. When the reply came from the Dublin clinic, interview confirmed, today, noon, she read it 3 times before she let herself feel it. Her own name on something. Her own work. Nothing to do with the Gallaghers. She had 1 week until the wedding. 1 week to become someone's wife. And she was sitting in a cottage on his land, chasing a proof of address for a job interview, trying to hold on to something that was still entirely hers. She needed the proof of address, for the application file, the one thing she hadn't managed to pull together yet. Her father's room was the small one at the back of the cottage, the one that faced the garden. She knocked out of habit even though she knew he was out on the grounds, then pushed the door open and went to the chest of drawers by the window. The document was somewhere in here. She was almost sure of it. She went through the top drawer, then the second, then the third, which was deeper and fuller. Old papers layered under older ones, the paperwork of a careful life. She found her immunization records, her old school reports, her parents' marriage certificate. At the back of the drawer, tucked against the corner, was a small wooden box she didn't recognize. She lifted it out. It wasn't locked. Inside, photographs she'd never seen. Her mother, younger than Kiara, had ever seen her standing somewhere green and unfamiliar, letters bound with string, a folded envelope unsealed that slipped from her fingers when she moved too fast, the contents scattered across the floor. Kiara crouched and gathered them quickly, not looking, just collecting, until one page landed face up and she saw it before she could choose not to. Old paper, yellowed. Official header. She picked it up. The header was official, the paper was old. Her eyes went to the name at the top and stayed there. Kiara O'Connor. Mother, Mary O'Connor. Father, Liam O'Connor. She didn't move. She wasn't sure she was breathing. The paper was in her hands, and the name was right there, and she read it again the way you read something when the first time doesn't land, slowly, carefully, like maybe the letters would rearrange themselves if she gave them enough time. They didn't. Kiara O'Connor, not Finlay. She sat down on the floor. Her legs just went. She was aware of the cold of the floorboards through her jeans and the sound of a bird outside the window, and the fact that the kettle was still on the counter and nothing in this room had changed at all, and none of it made any sense because the person named on this document was her birthday, her birthplace, and the names were wrong. "What is this?" Her voice came out flat and strange. "Why does my birth certificate have different names?" 300 meters away, on the road along the estate wall, a black car sat with its engine off. George Walsh was in the back seat. 61. Still. The kind of still that isn't calm. It's just years of practice. He'd been watching the estate gates through the tinted glass for the better part of an hour. "You're certain the name is Chiara?" The man beside him held up his phone. A young woman, dark-haired, a face that made you look twice. "Yes, Mr. Walsh. Pierce Gallagher's fiancée. The gardener's daughter, technically. Age matches." "Technically," Walsh repeated. His eyes stayed on the gate. A few minutes passed. Then the gate opened, and the woman from the photograph came through fast, a bag on her shoulder, her phone at her ear. Walsh watched her go. "It could be coincidence," the man beside him said. "I don't believe in coincidences." Walsh kept his voice level. "Find out more." Chiara was calling her father and getting voicemail and calling again as she came through the gate, the birth certificate in her jacket pocket because she couldn't leave it and couldn't look at it and had no idea what to do with it. One of the estate security stepped out. She recognized him, dark jacket, already watching her. "Miss Finlay," his voice was careful, "Mr. Gallagher's left instructions. We're to drive you into Dublin." She stopped. She stood there on the gravel with her phone in her hand and three things going at once. The interview, the paper in her pocket, the fact that she apparently now had a driver whether she wanted one or not. And none of it fit. The wedding was in 1 week. 1 week, and she didn't know her own name. She dropped her phone into her bag. "Fine, let's go." The interview had gone badly, or she thought it had. She'd sat in that clean, bright room and answered every question and smiled at the right moments and come out onto the Dublin street with no idea whether she'd been present for any of it. The birth certificate had been folded in her jacket pocket the entire time, pressing against her ribs. The Bentley was there when she came out. She hadn't expected that. Chiara stopped on the pavement. Pierce got out before she'd taken 2 steps toward it. He came around the car, and she didn't say anything, and neither did he. He just put his arms around her, and she went into them, her face against his shoulder, and the warmth of him hit before anything else did. She hadn't realized how cold she'd been. "I missed you." His voice was low, close to her ear. She didn't answer. Her eyes were burning, and she was not going to cry on a Dublin street. She had decided that much. He pulled back and looked at her. His hands came up to her face. "What happened?" She shook her head slightly. "Can we get in the car?" The city moved past the windows. Pierce had her hand in his thumb moving slow across her knuckles, and she was looking at her bag on the seat between them and not at him. "It's your first interview." His voice was careful. "Whatever you think went wrong. It's not about the interview." She reached into her bag and pulled out the folded paper. She'd been carrying it since yesterday. She'd carried it through a sleepless night and the drive-in and a 40-minute interview, and she was so tired of it being in her hands that she put it in his lap instead. Pierce looked down at it. He went still. Then he unfolded it, carefully, and read it, and she watched his face while he did. His jaw tightened. "Once. I found it in my father's drawer." Her voice was steady in a way that wouldn't last. "I wasn't looking for it. I was looking for my proof of address." Pierce said nothing. "It says I was born to different people." She heard how flat she sounded and couldn't fix it. "A different family. A different name. And I've been calling my dad all day and he won't pick up. And I don't know how to sit across from him and ask him if my whole life has been—" She stopped, pressed her lips together. "I need to know who I am, Pierce. Look into it. Whatever it takes." She watched him fold it again, crease by crease, exactly as it had been. His hands were steady. She didn't know how to feel about that. He set it on the seat beside him, then turned to her and pulled her close, his arm around her shoulders, her face against his neck. "I'll find out." Low, against her hair. "I will." She held on. She didn't see his face. She didn't see the way his eyes had gone somewhere distant. Not worried, not surprised, but the expression of a man recalculating, deciding how much time he had left. It wasn't supposed to come out yet. He'd had a plan, a sequence, everything in its order, the cottage, the estate, the club, the ring. All of it deliberate, all of it controlled, all of it moving toward this exact moment, except the moment was supposed to be his. He was supposed to be the one to tell her. He'd known for years. He'd known who she was before she ever looked up from her father's garden. Before the club, before the dress and the rain and the greenhouse, he'd known her real name, and he'd built everything around it until yesterday, until a drawer she shouldn't have opened and a document he should have moved years ago. Kiara shifted against him, her breathing slowing. Pierce stared at the window and thought about George Walsh, already circling, about Peter Finlay, who had kept the secret for 19 years and wasn't picking up his phone, about a wedding in 1 week and a woman who had just asked him for the truth. He would tell her, but not yet, not like this, not before she was already his, legally, completely, in every way that would hold up when the rest of it came apart. He pressed his lips to the top of her head. "I've got you," he said quietly. "I promise." His eyes moved to the rear-view mirror. A black car, 3 lengths back, keeping pace. He held it in the mirror for a moment, then let his gaze drop to the birth certificate on the seat beside him, then to Kiara, still against him, her breathing slow now. His jaw was tight. He'd protect her, from the truth, until she was ready for it, from his family until he'd dealt with them, from Walsh until there was nothing left to use. That was the part she would never understand. And, for now, that's where we leave them. Thank you for staying with Kiara and Pierce all the way to the end of part 1. I write these stories because something about them stays with me long after I finish, and I hope something stayed with you too. If you want to know what comes next, if you need to know whether Kiara stands her ground, whether Pierce earns what he wants, and what the truth buried in that cottage finally does to all of them, let me know in the comments. Write part 2, and I'll know you're ready for it. And if this story gave you something, a feeling, a moment, anything at all, please like and subscribe. It means more than you know, and it's how I keep writing. Thank you for being here. Really. I'll see you in part 2.